I never believed in the dead. Despite how intrigued I was with genres such as horror and thrillers, there was little to no interest in the deceased. There was an unnameable disgust toward death, regardless of my love for a rare ounce of psychological arousal. As a young boy, life introduced me to Urbach Vaith, and since then has eroded my ability to fear. In short, I couldn't worry or discern fear even if I desired to. I won't be able to experience something crucial like feeling warmth for the first time. Still, I engrossed myself in fear-inducing experiences, cinema, literature, haunted house walkthroughs, or roller coasters. You name it. However, I haven't had the slightest idea why. Conceivably, the meddling of the undead toyed with my mind. The unintended enjoyment of necromancy felt vulgar. Personal tastes aside, I would say that the dead should stay dead. Funerals were distraught, freak accidents turned cruel, and post-apocalyptic undead remained defensive. The work of disdain concealed itself beneath false satisfaction as I got older and more experienced with society. But nevertheless, I still clung to my favorite genres and found compassion in tales of grotesque fables. Behind the ghouls and cryptids stood genuine happiness in suspense and monstrosities. But that's what I assumed would hold out the longest. At the time, I was old enough to move out of my parents' house with their permission. 18 or so. I had devoted every penny and dime to this moment, and now it is finally happening. Every bit of hope for a new start will transform into a new life ahead of me. When faced with this opportunity, I wasn't scared. My parents, however, considered it too precarious and prayed for my security. Others believed it was a gift, a miracle even. Fear is an obstacle. It gets in the way of life. Then what's the point of living if you can't experience that vital emotion? Like that day. Part 1. I just moved in. It's a reasonable village townlet down south of Hudson in Westchester County, New York, yet it's still lively and flourishingly happy. Most of the place stands surrounded by lush trees like a forest, almost too crowded to reach the lake stretched by the Hudson River. As an austere individual, I fancied it here, far away from the city and in Mother Nature's embrace. Who wouldn't in my stead? Before arriving at my place, I toured the perimeter and explored new routes. Driving down an unknown road, I spotted an aging building just about the periphery, and this surprised me. The town demolished abandoned buildings since they adopted to improve the environment, removing unnecessary waste such as the structure. And from what I've heard, all the surrounding facilities remain eradicated, whereas this one, not so much. Once out of my vehicle, temptation and curiosity got the best of me as I discreetly strolled to the building's entrance. As I got closer, it diverted my attention when one of my heels unintentionally struck a heavy object. It turned out to be a sign, faded and crooked over the past years. The words were practically unrecognizable as I gently laid them down in their original location. I returned to survey the building once more and took in further details. It was a bar. It looked like any old bar. However, this one undoubtedly had a distinctive aura encircling it. The tavern was constructed of swarthy, thick wooden slabs, almost all impaired and fading in color, making it look effete black. The patched windows and doors with wooden planks. Only the splintered basement door at the side stood bounded with dense, rusting chains. Another enormous sign above the roof hung for dear life as one of its hinges managed to loosen by the wind. It was an unusual sight. However, sight undermined the reason why I never trekked onward. It reeked. It was pungent and putrid. The bar stank of some burnt animal left to decay. In numerous figments of rancid stretches came ubiquitous. My nose wrinkled and cringed as I attempted to fan out the disgusting stink. It smelled like blanched smoke. Even in the face of the odor, something else forced my head toward the eerie edifice. There wasn't a defined answer, yet one word undoubtedly described it. Addictive. Something within smelled addictive. And after several stern glances and desperate attempts to avoid my gaze, I slackened myself from getting too suspicious or weird. Turning around and away from the bar, I backed my car into the main road, often wincing from the potent malodor and surrounding dust. As I drove off, from the very corner of my vision behind me, I could have sworn the presence of the sudden dim lights flickering in the tavern. Now, when it comes to autumn, there ought to be autumn rain. It was showering endlessly. Most of the vicinity was either flooded or soaking wet, and because of this, I spent most of the day in my apartment, studying outside the window facing the nearby woods. I just can't help but brood about that abandoned and broken down bar. Was it that important, I wondered. I pushed and focused and returned to study for an exam for the week. With my mind clouded with fixation and boredom, I couldn't help but drift off to that lonely place. It was odd, though I never drove deeper into introspection. I was fortunate to have a roommate, but not just any roommate. You see, Niall worked for the town's tourism department. We rarely spoke to each other despite common interference. It's not like we saw ourselves as burdens. We maintained several errands outside of our apartment, and the possibility of communication remained low throughout our work and studies. However, if we did, we would converse about plain day-to-day topics: weather, shopping lists, work, college, saving money for rent, the average stuff. Niall arrived about a half hour late from his regular schedule due to the storm. He was soaking wet, his trench coat hanging on to him like a vast dripping blanket. He greeted me with a warm smile before heading to his room to wash off. After a few hours, we shared tea and gentle conversations in the living room, the atmosphere calm and peaceful with the sound of rain outside. The weather reminded me of the crippled bar down the road. I asked him about it. His lips twitched to form a thin line. He set down his lukewarm Earl Grey tea on his lap, his eyes wavering uncontrollably. He managed to crack a half-hearted grin before responding. That bar? The one off the road near the lake? I nodded. Forget it. You shouldn't interfere with that place, Niall said dismissively. It's considered a bad omen to talk about the tavern. It isn't a popular topic among the folks here. I didn't know what he was blabbering about, so I went along with him and played it out. Really? My tone gradually tinged with amusement and curiosity. Well, it's up to interpretation on what's real. He paused. Say, you believe in the supernatural? Niall questioned. This act of query made me raise my eyebrow. Depends what you're talking about. Cryptids? Aliens? I asked him, never looking up from my cup. No, the undead. The undead. Ghosts and zombies? No, not really, I admitted. I don't think about ghouls more than I do any supernatural or paranormal. I mean, why? What of it? Well, you see, Niall started placing his hands together and fiddling with them. This town has its infamous folklore passed down from generation to generation, though it's very recent to date back. It's been a tradition to tell them to kids so they wouldn't wander too far into the woods. He continued. However, this tale isn't all that fiction, like how most portray it. There are different variations of the story. Almost every house has one. But nevertheless, the initial gossip was originally a retelling of a real murder case with several disappearances. And it all ties back to that godforsaken bar. My roommate glanced around before straightening his posture, and he looked me in the eyes, dead serious. "You want to hear the story of the bartender?" Niles whispered slowly. I leaned in, patient and keen to listen, until Niles stood up and waltzed to the hallways. Now, in all honesty, it stunned me. I stared, scrutinizing for an answer. Was this merely jesting? "Maybe tomorrow. Curfew hours," Niles simply stated and yawned, positioning himself against the walls to turn off the lights. "Ah," I merely exclaimed. "All right, get some rest, pal." Pressing my thumb and index finger between the nose bridge, I groaned in sudden exhaustion, descending back to my chair. Grabbing my phone from the foyer table, I caught a glimpse of the time, 11:54 p.m. Hell, it couldn't have been this late. Observing my disappointment, Niles shrugged. "I could get copies of the case files. The department doesn't do anything but safekeep the documents. I'm sure they won't mind." "Thanks, Niall," I said. He hummed before dragging himself to his bedroom. I stayed a bit, wondering if my interest perked from the obedience to the paranormal. I frowned, bothered and anxious. There's no such thing. Before heading to bed, I remembered something. I'd forgotten to tell him about the bar's grotesque smell. What's so strange and foul about it? How about the lights flickering on? Was that my imagination as well? Too tired for anything else, as I succumbed to hypnosis, I thought perhaps tomorrow I'll ask him. Part 2. The following morning my skin met a frigid wind. The windows were open, letting the breeze blow into the room. The air grew quick with the scent of smoke. I grimaced at the familiar smell. Damn, I mouthed. Thinking about the bar influenced my ability to function. Peering out the window with tired eyes, I noticed the rain had finally stopped. I quickly got up and started my morning routine. Niles disappeared just by seeing an empty bed in his room, but the lukewarm dark coffee on the table confirmed he had left the apartment recently. He was probably doing his morning errands just like usual. If anything, I should be the one preparing to go out. Halfway through the tram pilgrimage, I learned journalism class had been canceled via email, presumably a flash flood yesterday. Although disgruntled, I found myself in the campus library. I locked myself in a private cubicle and I got to work. Then I extrapolated this as a reasonable time to research the bar while Niall was away. I got my laptop out and searched the town's webpage, later discovering information regarding the bar and its history. And at first, nothing popped up unless you scrolled down far enough into the website. The bar's section was brief, skimmed through, almost as if a mere text was lost and forgotten. Some articles included missing persons from the 20th century, no doubt related to the tavern, yet weren't particularly forced on the cases. I was looking for the undead, still nothing. Several hours into my studies, my back began to strain and pull from my abnormal position on the stiff seat. I decided to go for a walk. All around me were the beautifully colored skies and raining maple leaves. The leaves scattered throughout the cement road as I walked upon them. I tried to avoid the puddles as much as possible, but even that couldn't put my mind to rest. By the end of the afternoon, my energy drained as my shoulders scrunched in fatigue. At the local park, I sat on a bench, watched the kids play freebie, while the adults chatted about the incoming holidays. I watched until my mind traveled to what Niles said last night, an undead entity that haunts the bar. It's impossible. Those things don't exist. Or do they? I had no idea. As the sky transitioned to night, Niall called, notifying me to return. His voice sounded urgent and swift. He said he had a surprise awaiting in our apartment. Of course, I had already suspected the surprise gift, but played along. I returned the favor and said I would return in a few minutes. Immediately, Niall's premature chuckle found its way to my ears before hanging up. I knew this would be a gift to be shared, a gift to be recognized. Niall dragged me inside and harshly locked the door behind us, which was unusual behavior. Inside the living room, the center coffee table has been replaced with a large box with tape sealing every crack visible. I turned to him, curious, before going back to the package. Must be the surprise that he prepared for me, I thought silently. Niall stood behind me and nodded, granting permission to open it. Inside, I found it brimming with items. Multiple crumbled police files along with preserved photos and newspapers dating back to the early 1940s. I looked at these strange and random objects while inspecting each one of them. My roommate convinced the sheriff and the tourist department to give me some files for my diminutive research. It turns out they had given almost everything related to the tavern. They said the cases were going cold. Not enough evidence, and most of the things said and done were probably mere coincidences. Just too good to be real mishaps of the past. When he finished, he told me about the old folklore that haunted the town, or perhaps the bar where it died. The fable began during the late 1900s, though most details had insulated from the original as the village grew older and more people moved in. It's now a town story to prevent young children from wandering too far into the woods, or a demon will find them and devour their souls. Contrary to most of their beliefs, these stories were all too real. As for the entity, many didn't believe in the paranormal, or just this one. In the 20th century, the bartender from Heaven's Bar got shot, decapitated. The upper skull had blown off of their jaw and scattered throughout the bar. Witnesses stated the murder was a result of an unspecified brawl. The suspects? Unknown or undisclosed. Rumors have it that the police hid evidence due to bribes. The work of the mafia, but no one knows for sure. The customers didn't recall anything during interrogation, possibly from a state of shock. Yet they always remember the faint smell of smoke and blood from the disturbance. What was strange was when the haunting started. Things disappeared and reappeared in places unimaginable. Wine bottles and glasses will spill and crash unsuspectingly, and random collisions in one room but never the next. It took a turn when a man said to have seen a knife fly past his head in the public restroom. The police investigated the area to find no clear entrances where the knife had entered, but the only proof was the switchblade stabbed into the wall left from the incident. But it wasn't only things going missing for a certain amount of time. Individuals started going missing and were never found, even to this day. Although the missing persons didn't deliberately connect to the bar, people talked. What's stranger was when the bar's manager disappeared after the closing night. The disappearance only added to the mystery that shrouded the story in the town. Many suspected it to be the spirit of the malicious late bartender or a possible demon by its actions. Some even said it was the devil itself. But whatever it was, it remained a debate until the bar officially shut down in 1945, before the owner vanished, possibly from the horror and the lack of customers. Other complaints included reports of foul odor within the pub. Regardless, it remained a suspicion until someone dared to challenge the entity. Now, just about 10 years ago, a group of young teenage boys defied the rules and stories of the demon and went to the bar. They wanted to test it, pester it, mock it to see if the foolish folklore was authentic. From the written police record, the leader, a 15-year-old, threw a rock at one of its windows and cracked it, and then they ran for it, although still absurd, towards the abandoned lonely place. Mysteriously, the boy wasn't with them. They went back to check, only to find his lifeless body on the stairs of the bar's entrance. Investigators tried to figure out the cause of death, but it didn't seem right. They said the cause of death was due to charcoal burning. From charcoal? There wasn't any traces of charcoal from the surrounding areas, or the boy. By suicide, perhaps, but that's very unlikely, and to be done within a few minutes was impossible. He was just dead. None of the boys saw what had happened, nor did they give a good hint of evidence. In the end, the case halted and remained unsolved. After the unfortunate event, more people who countered the bar negatively began to die from sudden deaths like drowning, falling from buildings, unconsciously leaping in front of moving vehicles, and unexpected suicides. Some disappeared, similar to many years ago. One young photographer working for the town's newsprint took a picture of the bar before hanging herself the next day. But that is not all that got discarded from her. She managed to capture an image of a figure. The figure stood surrounded by black smoke, especially the head, and wore a black and white bartender uniform, the exact suit used when the bar was still open. This photo was one primary clue to justify that the entity was the dead bartender. Paranormal inspectors tried to link the images, the figure in the photographs the young bartender had taken before they died. After months of investigating, they had finally found an answer. It was indeed a match. The townspeople erupted. They were fascinated by the discovery, but fearfully hesitant about the subject. They didn't know what to do. Some thought of eradicating the whole building. However, they will suffer an ill fate. Others just didn't believe the story, dubbing its dubious marketing strategies for the tourist department and the town. But in the end, no one dared to approach it. As the years went by, the town got used to the unnatural phenomena surrounding them, masking it with ignorance and skepticism. When people started disappearing again, it caused most community members to flee out of fear. Since the vicinity wanted to keep its image and ignored its horrendous past, its introduction to the grim tale remained limited. However, when I heard those stories, I couldn't help but grow more fascinated by this entity. The questions solved became several more inquiries and clustered my curious mind. I was fascinated, yet I was very confused. The undead comes back to haunt the living. I started. There has to be a rational explanation. Are there any motives? Was there a motive? Niles shrugged. He halted before responding. Well, the same thing applies to serial killers. You don't know their motives half the time. The other half is when they don't know either. He examined me, never leaving my sight. You don't believe in it, do you? It was my turn to shrug. I don't know, everything seems absurd. Photoshop's a thing, you know. The room became still with tension. Niall wanted to argue with me, but he held his tongue. A couple of seconds in, and I would have already lost it. Yet, perhaps from the luck of God, I remembered my question from last night, and so I asked. Say, there was this smell in the morning. It reeked like the bar's very smoky, yet putrid. My roommate threw his head at me, horrified. When was this? 2 days ago? One? Most recent was this morning. You need to leave this town, Niles said brutally. An uneven air swept between us. Now. Part 3. My face morphed into confusion, then conflicting emotions hit me all at once. I laughed. I can't leave this place. I just got here. Besides, I ain't leaving because some fabled goon who's responsible for the disappearance of dozens. Why? Just because you didn't believe in that doesn't mean your life isn't in danger. He barked at me. Disbelief. My mind was in utter disbelief, more disappointed, if anything. In a state of pure shock, I spoke my opinion. I dictate my own life, Niles. If there's a serious hypothesis for any of the happenings, here's what I think. The town is to blame for its irresponsibility in further investigating the cases. Then they started using jaded fairy tales to excuse their poor sob-ass authorities that couldn't find those people and capture the real suspects. And so I continued. And if you're worried about me, then shit, how about yourself? Why not move out of the village if you knew something was out to get people? This time, Niall had it. He heaved a groan. Fine. Do you really want an answer? I'll give it to you. My brother went into that damn building since he sniffed up some scent by the bar. He vanished a week into madness, and he never came back. And I'm only here because I'm certain he's still alive. I'm certain the bar has something to do with it. My eyes widened at his confession. It explained a lot. His reaction and possessive attitude kept me away. Yet despite hearing his side of the story, I recovered from my sympathy and stated my thoughts. Niles, my condolences, but I nevertheless stand with my argument. Your brother's disappearance might not be related to the bar. I explained. That's a make-believe story. There's no ghosts or undead to dismiss or even to blame. You're being a bit delusional. If he's missing for so long, if that thing is real, he might have died, Niall. He's dead. My words that night were something I regretted for a very long time. Niall left the apartment after our argument. He drove off into the woods, and God knows where he was heading to. I didn't bother to call. It was best to assume my response gave him a difficult time. I would have liked him to adjust to his feelings before returning, so I loitered for a day. 2 days, 3, and then it turned into 5, and then I waited for a week, but he never came back. And the weight of guilt slowly drove me mad until I filed for a missing persons report. However, that wasn't even enough to soothe me. Phone lines weren't reaching him either, and as I waited, something in my mind screamed danger. That something wasn't right. I disputed as much as I considered what Niall said. The authorities were just ass at their jobs, pretty much lounging baboons in uniforms at most. If someone were to look for him immediately, it would have to be me. I had already scouted the town, and to my surprise, no one saw him either. My best guess would have been to go searching in the forest. The road down by the Hudson River grew bumpier and more forgotten as we passed more oaks and rocks. It was so close to winter that the ground was already frozen. The radio jammed some light jazz music, yet my fingers couldn't stop drumming the steering wheel out of stress. My gazes hovered towards the trees, hoping to find my friend Niall within them, but still no sign of him. Soon it was already afternoon, and I couldn't look further. Circling the area, I purposely left the best for the last. Niall specifically told me not to go near that place again. However, desperate situations call for desperate measures. I didn't want to lose him. Driving by a tight corner, I catch a glimpse of silver gray. As I drew closer, I held my breath and let go when I noticed it was a car. It was Niall's car. The car was there, yet no person was in sight. This wasn't like him. Confusion and concern spiked my mind. I traveled further to look for him. There's no way a person could roam this far by foot if it's going back to the town, unless there was another destination they could have gone to. My breath hitched, stopping in my tracks as I contemplated my anxiety. The bar was near. After a few minutes, I noticed a glimpse of the bar's roof. Making my way down the path, I finally found the bar's location. I was grateful for once. However, something was wrong. I parked right across the abandoned bar once I arrived. The tavern nevertheless remained the same, though wooden slabs patched the entrance. I quickly went up its steps and jiggled the rusted doorknob. Sweat dripped down my head when I heard an unmistakable click. And that's when I noticed the rigid planks weren't bounding the frame. They never had, just mere decorations to deceive the naked eye. Once the door opened, I peered inside. Dust caked the walls and all the furniture was still there. The wallpaper curved out of shape, dull and moist. Some of the corners had gotten mold between visible cracks. Furnishings toppled over, some destroyed, and the stench grew more potent. Yet, I didn't care. I was looking for something or even someone. And there I saw him. Niall. A wave of relief came crashing as I came kneeling towards him. Seemingly hiding under the bar counter, Niall sat idly on the floor. His legs didn't seem to work. One of his ankles had a painful purple and green bulging in size. Sprained, I thought. I wondered how Niall managed to move around. His caving body wasn't any better. The guy had been shaking since I saw him. What the hell happened? Why are you even here, Niall? Why's your leg like that? I asked him. I don't know. The bar spoke to me. The door wouldn't open, Niall frantically exclaimed. I was driving around when I stopped at a curve to calm myself, but then I smelled it, and I couldn't move. My head started spinning, and the next thing I knew, I showed up in this damn building. It wanted to toy with me. Everything seemed so out of place. Things were moving. The bar was moving. Just get me out of here, he said, sobbing as I tried to calm him down. All right, it's okay. We gotta get you out, I reassured my friend. Grabbing onto his arms, I pulled him and slowly made my way to the exit. Until I saw it. Like the photos, everything remained accurate. The dark pigmented skin, the bloody outdated bartender uniform, and most of all, its decapitated head. Its tongue freely wiggled as if it had a life of its own. Blood from their wounds continuously spilled into their uniform and floor as smoke piled up the ceiling. The teeth were still intact as the gross flesh sat on its head, and despite wearing old-fashioned cloth, the style showed prestige. However, blood and gore covered its body as if a child had splattered red paint against it. The thing was rotting from the inside out. It stood there, taunting us as the walls creaked and groaned, almost like it was alive. What was familiar, though, was the smell. Seething, charcoaled flesh. The source of the odor had been here this entire time. I could have laughed, but I didn't. It was all too real. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen or heard of. I couldn't move. No matter how hard Niall or my mind screamed to move, my body wouldn't budge. I couldn't help but get drained and observe the situation. It felt as if my feet stood physically glued to the ground. I stood there staring at it with exhaustive stares and a dry throat. The thing suddenly tilted its head, decapitated from the jaw while blood poured out from the reaction. The dead stalked forward towards us. Some of its blood spilled onto my hands and face, foul and disgusting as it burned my hands with toxins and scum. Stank just like its smoke. It made me let go of Niall out of instinct. I tumbled out of the bar onto the floor and into the ground, panting intensively, never looking back into the building. From my suffering stomach, vomit came rushing out as I heaved myself from anxiety. What the fuck was that thing? But then suddenly, a new wave of panic hit me. Niall. I left Niall in there. My legs scrambled up and marched onto the steps where I paused. The undead bartender stood in front of me, tilting their jaws yet again. It lightly bobbed its shoulder as a gesture of amusement. They found this gravelly entertaining. It slowly raised its hand and waved before the doors started to swing. From that moment on, I heard the faintest words before they parted. That rasping voice teased the living as it danced with the death. It mocked both of us. It ridiculed me. Goodbye, was all it said to me. I didn't flinch, however a lump rose from my chest when I realized what it was doing. With every ounce of strength I had left, I bolted. I ran faster than I did in my lifetime, more quickly than I could think. Everything ached. Sweat dripped down my chin as I screamed for my roommate's name. Niall called back to me, his arms stretching towards the closing door as he cried, "Samuel, wait!" The door closed and clicked locked. I spent hours hammering at the door. Sometimes I tried to peel the wooden slabs off the bar, but to no avail. I would return to the door and pound again. My head became faint, and my tired eyes grew heavy with tears. I yelled for Niall's name again, but it was too late. Niall was already gone. It was that time of year again. I live in a small urban settlement along with roughly 20,000 other people. I'll try my best to keep the description brief. Barely anything usually happens here. We have an unusually low crime rate and people are freakishly very friendly, but I've never seen this as a bad thing. It's an average town, you could say. Townhouse, a court, one hospital, a police station, a fire station, 4 primary schools and 3 secondary schools, several religious buildings, 3 churches, 1 mosque, and 1 synagogue to be exact. An unusual low amount of clothes shops, for a town that size, and a lot of pubs though. What can I say? We drink to get drunk. There's several hotels, restaurants, banks, entertainment centers, etc., etc. But driving through here, you wouldn't think much of this place. But there is one unexplainable presence we've all shared for many generations. My mother and father would have had it ever since they moved here in 1987. Our next-door neighbor, who has lived here since she was born, has had it, which is the year 1949, I'm told. My best friend Steven has had it. Actually, now that I think about it, everybody my age from my town naively posts about it on Facebook all the time. It's the tongue of the town for the youth, but our elders are never comfortable talking about it. My mom and dad are happy to talk as well, but when I asked our neighbor for more details, she seemed almost panicky and shut the door in my face, all the while giving me a pathetic excuse to not interact with me about it. This event all links back to that time of year. It starts out with the weather. The cold, fresh air of spring is suddenly replaced by this horrible, heavy, humid atmosphere. Even just going to the shop feels horrible, and it's hard to breathe. Thunder is frequent at nighttime, but the weird part is, there is no lightning or precipitation. It's just this loud rumbling from the depths of the sky. Next are the animals, and I'm not just talking about the average household pets like literally the cats, dogs, birds, ducks, and rodents. It's all of them. Ducks don't stop quacking and birds fly in circles and become, well, idiots basically. They start flying into cars, buildings, and trees. And the same goes for people with tropical birds as pets, non-stop tweeting and flying into the rail of the cage. As for rodents, they dig holes in people's gardens, which is a nightmare for hardcore gardeners like my father. I have 2 dogs at home, 1 male and 1 female. The male becomes agitated and extremely paranoid. All day he will stare out of the window with absolute concentration, almost like he's in a state of total focus, ears fully pricked up and shaking and whining all day long. I've seen mental patients that seem more at ease than him. Any little sound or movement from outside will make him go apeshit. My family and I decided it would be best not to disturb him during this time. Any time he's not barking or whining, he's howling. And this is quite odd because he's a Chihuahua. The Huskies and German Shepherds do it as well, but it seems normal coming from them. My other dog now is a different story. For this period of time, she sits in her basket solemnly sulking, breathing heavily. She'll barely even eat, which is very out of character for her. She looks completely miserable. I didn't even think this could happen to dogs. She's a Jack Russell and a King Charles hybrid, and because she's a female, it's in her nature to be calm and courteous. But this is just disturbing. You could rub her on the ears, and she loves that. Put food right in front of her nose or call her name repeatedly, but nothing will work. It's like she doesn't exist for the week, like she's alive in another universe. Her body is functioning, but she's not there. And if you think that I had it bad, you should hear about my friend Emma. She owns 2 cats, both female. This week is when the cats just turn into complete lunatics. It's so saddening and disheartening to see all the dead cats at the end of the week. Whatever's going on, it just turns the cats into bloodthirsty savages. Emma dreads this week every year. Cats are kept separate for a whole week, but it's not just other cats they attack. Emma's cats have been known to attack her as well. Oddly enough, though, this only occurs during the night. Over the last few years, she's complained of menacing meows coming from both ends of her bungalow. One night, 2 years ago, she actually left her bedroom window open while the cat was in the back garden. She awoke at 7:30 a.m. to a searing, stinging sensation shrouding her scrawled and scratched face. She didn't come to school for the rest of the week. She still has one scar below her left blue eye to this day. And for everyone, the animals are what concern them the most, but for me, it's the dreams that I have. I'm not the only one to get them. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone in town gets them around this time. The only way to describe these dreams are strange. They're just not out of the blue kinda weird though. The stories we have shared with each other about our dreams simply cannot be explained by the average human being. To put simply, they're bizarre. Nothing particularly wrong with them most of the time. In fact, these strange dreams are normally funny. A few I remember is my family trying to get a snake out of the house, even though there are no snakes in Ireland. It seems pretty normal. I'm not really sure why that one stands out though. Other strange dreams during this period have included me being the spectator at a boxing match between Anne Frank and a baked potato. A feeling of complete joy when I found the matching pairs for all of my odd socks, and me being the captain of a submarine filled with 600 people. However, all the people were just the closest members of my family. So, there's 200 sisters, 200 mothers, and 200 fathers, which is slightly odd, right? But those were the nice dreams. There were a few, however, that were a little more sinister. Every year during this week, I would have at least 2 nightmares, as far as I could remember. The most I've ever had is 3. One that stands out was me in the middle of nothing, literally surrounded by total blackness. Not darkness, blackness. Darkness is where there is an absence of light, but this place is just a void of everything. Every time I looked down, up, back, forward, I just saw nothing. Like I was blind, like I was trapped in a big black box. I tried running, but it felt like I was just running at standstill. To keep up with my own sanity, I was terrified. After a while, though, I began to hear a faint sound. It only took me a few seconds to realize, but it was the old alarm siren used in Britain during World War II to signal that the Germans were about to attack. This sound always used to scare me, but for some reason, I felt a sense of relief when it came on during my dream, a feeling that I wasn't alone. That didn't last long when I suddenly heard the faint sound of a young child weeping. Not the, I didn't get what I want and now I'm going to throw a loud hissy fit kind of cry, but the child was experiencing genuine emotional pain for the first time and just didn't know how to react. Just a silent weep. It wasn't just that I could hear this, but I could also feel the pain too. It was like a mass mix of emotional torment and blinding confusion. The feeling of, I'm an innocent child. Why do I feel this way? As an impending nightmare was due for this week, I decided to set my alarm for 3 a.m. to wake me up halfway through it. I may not be able to sleep afterwards, but to be honest, I was just sick of that weak mental state feeling the whole day after you experience a horrible nightmare. You never know. Maybe I'd get lucky this year and just have a lot of pleasant yet strange dreams. So I set the alarm and I read a book to help me get sleepy. It was as soon as I had closed my eyes that I had drifted off. Later that night, as expected, I gained consciousness in a dream. At first, I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but judging by the feeling of dread in the dark, damned atmosphere, this wasn't going to be pretty. I was trapped in my parents' suite bathroom. The room was dark, and the sky outside was a very dark shade of purple. Out the window, I could see no moon, but there were several stars shining very brightly. I had no clue where I was. I could hear faint piano music coming from the attic. It wasn't like a hauntingly peaceful melody, though. It was like a 5-year-old child violently smashing it randomly. However, whoever it was playing it in perfect rhythm and was only banging the high notes. To put it straight, they were playing utter gibberish, yet they knew exactly what they were doing. I wasn't even sure that made sense. Now, this room is probably the smallest in my house, only behind the cloakroom and the heating press. I put my hand on the door handle, but I couldn't leave. Not that the door was locked or anything. The door might have or might not have been locked. I didn't even know. My brain wouldn't let me push down the handle. I tried, but my arm wouldn't budge. I panicked and I grabbed my right arm with my left, and I tried to push it down, but my arm just wouldn't move. Hell, I tried kicking the door and running into it. Nothing. I sighed and accepted that I was stuck here. I approached the other side of the room. I profoundly refused to even look at the mirror. I just decided I'd just try waiting this out with that god-awful piano music playing in the background. But suddenly, without me even realizing, my head started twisting towards the mirror slowly. I tried my best to resist it, but just like with the handle, it was no use. Slowly but surely, my entire body slavishly drifted towards the position where I'd be posed perfectly in front of the mirror. I tried to turn my head, closing my eyes and looking the opposite direction, but I simply had no control. I was left staring at my perfectly lit up reflection for some time. I had a neutral pose upon my face, but I knew I was frightened out of my wits. What was going to happen? Why was this happening? When will it end? I had so many questions, but such little information. All I had was this dark room and myself, the banging piano music still playing over and over again, and without warning, it stopped. I paused all my thoughts because I couldn't control my body. There was this maddening silence for what felt like the longest minute of my life. Usually in total silence, the human mind will start making you hear things, but not this time. Total lack of sound. My body posed perfectly still, but in my own head, I was completely freaking out. And then it started out of nothing, completely deafening me. A shrieking beeping noise. Hell, it sounded like my phone. My phone. My alarm. My alarm was going off, but I wasn't waking up. I continued to stare at my own terrifying reflection, with the somewhat relieving sound of the alarm perforating my dream world eardrum. The alarm getting louder and louder and louder, the piano music started again, blending in with the alarm's beeping. That's when my head started tilting. That same expression on my face in plain sight on the mirror, but my head tilting ever so slowly to the left. With every bang of the piano, My head would move the tiniest bit, but the rest of my body stayed perfectly still. All I could do was watch until I got it to the point where my head was bent down at an impossible angle to even still be alive. My neck and head hung loosely from my shoulders, still with the same blank expression, like nothing was happening. But then that changed too. A demented smile started to grow on my face. The piano banging from the attic started to speed up as the alarm music started to become twisted, switching back and forth from playing normally to backwards, and the volume and pitch started to become distorted, playing at different volumes. The smile kept growing and growing until you could see even my wisdom teeth. My hazel eyes opened wider and wider as my pupils swelled up my entire iris. Blood started to drip from the sides of my mouth as the smile started growing beyond my cheeks. The piano music no longer had rhythm or was professionally played. It just sounded like somebody repeatedly smacking their head off of the keys as high and low notes were going off, sharp notes clashing with flat ones. My entirely black iris started to shake in my eyes as blood rushed down from both eyes, and the once enormous smile on my face was now a gaping hole in my head as my teeth fell out, one by one. The black iris in both eyes shaking furiously out of control. I suddenly froze. Everything froze. The music froze. What now? I don't have an attic. I don't even have a piano. I woke up screaming as if I had just been stabbed in the damn leg. Today was not going to be a good day. I opened the window to get a breath of fresh air, for getting the air was still humid and horribly wrong. There was no wind whatsoever. I walked downstairs to get some food, and my family were all acting normally. Nothing unusual going on between them. I checked my phone to look at the time. The thought of it even looking at that thing only sent shivers down my spine. I checked it to see if anything was off. One new text from Emma. Well, that was expected. I usually do. My withering senses, however, were new. I was becoming paranoid all of a sudden. This is the first year that this had happened. Emma had texted me asking what time I was getting to the bus for college. It was things like this morning, which I was extremely grateful for. My ordinary, boring life. It had settled me down from my traumatizing night. It had been 7 days now. I was just now waiting for the next few days just to fuck off. I enjoyed my average daily weekday walk down to the bus stop, only with just one bit of thunder startling me on my way. I approached Emma waiting for me at the stop, wearing her usual headband with a daisy attached to it. Now, she was a bit of a hippie. She was fiddling with her long blonde hair, staring off into the distance. She looked like she had something bothering her. I could tell by her facial expression. I'd known her for about 10 years, and these were always her actions when there was something making her feel uncomfortable or upset. "Hey, what's up?" I asked. "Hey, the usual, and you?" she replied. Yeah, definitely something wrong. Usually her response would be sarcastic, witty, or even teasing, often insulting me. But that's what I loved about her, one of the best personalities that I knew. "Are you sure?" I inquired. "You seem a little off," I admitted. "Oh, it's just that time of year again, you know. Had a pretty messed up dream last night," she replied. "Well, you're not the only one," I said. "I had an awful dream last night." "Yeah, but you deserve one though, you shithead," she said with a cheeky little smile. Ah, there it is. I giggled it off. "Well, what was your dream about, anyway?" "No way I'm talking about mine, fuck." "You pussy," she exclaimed. "Mine was freaky as fuck, though.
I dreamt I was locked in this creepy-ass attic playing a piano, and I just could not stop, no matter how hard I tried." My face dropped. There was like a bunch of other weird crap as well, like I kept hearing this alarm going off. I interrupted immediately with a pose of despair. Her face turned from bright and bubbly to empty and frightened. How did you... Wait, what?" she mumbled, while mildly flailing her arms towards her head in disbelief. All I could do was watch, mouth opened, while Emma was close to breaking down in panic. I grabbed her arm and comforted her, trying my very best to calm her down. Usually, I was never very good at these kinds of things, but Emma always appreciated the effort of people comforting one another. Her breathing was heavy, and a rare look of dread had overcome her usual quirky face. We stared at each other for a few long seconds, trying to catch up with reality. For a brief moment, I had forgotten all about it. I was expecting this usual town to just pass on as it always did. Until now. There was something menacing about all of this. Why does it happen here? My cousins in the neighboring town had never experienced it. But why the terror? Why all the animal chaos? Scores needed to be settled. Somebody knows something. "We need to talk," I told her. No response. That was a yes. She knew something. It was mutually agreed that we both take the day off to discuss plans. The story explained for this town. It's just the drastic change in weather causing it all. But that can't be it. I know that it's not. This town is brainwashed and has been for years now. My neighbor was hiding a secret from me. A secret which clearly made her feel at unease. What had her so agitated at this time of year? Why did she change the subject and freak out any time I brought it up? I was just so goddamn sick of just being given stupid, insincere, vague slander for answers all of the time. Well, no more. After I brought Emma home and spent about an hour calming her down, we set out to my neighbor's residence. Emma hated anything to do with the supernatural or the paranormal. She acts tough around most people, but I can see right past it, and she knows it. She won't watch any horror movie that doesn't have any logic behind it, always giving some abysmal excuse to everybody, while at the same time texting me complaining why we have to watch such filth. Even just a silly little coincidence could leave her rocking back and forth in extreme paranoia for the guts of an hour. I couldn't even imagine how she was dealing with this right now. My neighbor had always been a very introverted person. I've been her neighbor for 14 years, and for as long as I can remember, every single night she has had the blinds pulled on every single window in her house. Anytime I wave at her in the street or stop to say hello, it was like she never had any time for me. She has one daughter who visited her quite frequently, and every week a group of other elders visited her house for approximately an hour, although sometimes they could be there up to 4 hours. The longest they've been there is 4 days, if I recall correctly. These elders I also recognized from the town. There were always 4 regulars there for every single meeting. Rain, wind, or shine, they'll be there. And the most I've ever seen is well over 20. This odd behavior has always intrigued me. The house itself looks like any other house on my road. It's clean, painted white, and has a well-kept garden and a shed. There's nothing out of the ordinary then, I suppose. Now, as we approached her house, we noticed the absence of one silver Mercedes. That was the signal for the go-ahead then. Emma and I decided it would be best to enter her house from my garden. And so we ventured through my house, out the conservatory door, and peeked through her kitchen window and the dining room door which led into the garden. There was no sign of her. I hopped over the fence and landed on the grass, only to be met with a tongue-biting scrunch sound against my shoe. I leaned over and brushed my hand through what I had discovered was fake grass. Fuck me. Why would my neighbor have plastic grass? Come to think of it, she has no grass or plants on her front garden either. It's made entirely of pebbles and stone. Emma then hopped over the peeling green fence and landed on the so-called grass. I stretched my hand out and rubbed all her flowers, trees, and the bushes. These were all artificial as well. I honestly didn't know what to make of this. I'd never noticed this before. It all looked so real. To have your garden reshaped like this just must cost her an absolute fortune. Emma stared at me with a concerned perplexity. We spaced out for a while, trying to make out what this was all about. We agreed to keep going before she got home. She ran ahead of me and looked through both windows, and that's when I noticed something absolutely horrifying. The daisy in Emma's headband, it was curling up, all the petals turning brown in seconds, the stem turning into a disgusting murky dry yellow color. Sure, the daisy was already dead, but rotting just as soon as we got into the synthetic garden, and at that rate, I thought it was best not to say anything. Emma then jerked on the door, but nothing. We tried all the windows on the side and the back of the house. They were all locked, and that's when Emma took a clip from her hair and started twisting and turning it into a picklock. She stuck it into the keyhole and fiddled it around for a few seconds before we heard the victorious click of the lock giving in to our demands. Emma crept inside and instantly turned around to me with a wrinkled-up facial expression. As soon as I set foot in the house, I knew that she was signaling. The smell. It was just the overwhelming smell of tar. Now, this house looked like the ordinary suburban 80s house, but the inside looked like an 1800s cottage. Her kitchen table was just a large slab of marble. I desperately looked around for a light switch, except there were no lights. I looked around one more time. All candles and fire-lit lamps. No plug sockets could be seen. The only light coming from outside, and seeing as there's no sun, the atmosphere in here was absolutely miserable. I checked around one last time. There was absolutely no electricity at all. Candles decorated the counters, stoves and pots scattered everywhere as well. This was a total clash to the synthetic garden within eyeshot of us both. The slight headache that all the colors of the garden had given me were unsettlingly soothed by the plainness of this residence, and without hesitation, we continued on to explore the rest of the house. The hallway was laid out pretty similarly to the kitchen and dining room. No lights, stone walls, and creaky wooden floors. You'd expect this place to be freezing, but it was much warmer than the kitchen. The smell of tar was now much stronger, and Emma and I were finding it very difficult to breathe. As we went through here, my vision started to blur, and my pace started to stutter. I resorted to a clumsy, disoriented mess within a rapid space of time, struggling to make any sense of the situation. And then suddenly, there was an unexpected thud. Now I half-heartedly hauled my heavy head to the source of the sorrowing sound. After half a second of tensing my focus, I saw that Emma had lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground like a rag doll. After the realization, I made my best effort to struggle over to her assistance. For now, this needed to wait. We both needed to leave. I limped to my best efforts over to her body laying in a heap on the dark, damaged floors. I placed my left hand on her warm left arm and grabbed her right shoulder with my right arm. I hoisted her up as quickly as possible as my vision started to fade into darkness, merging objects into indistinguishable blobs. I slowly stumbled towards what I made out to be the front door. and I placed my hand on the knob and twisted to only confirm my worst fears, that it was locked. Now, I literally had seconds of energy left. It would have taken a miracle for me to make it back down out of the backyard before I had passed out, and with nothing left to lose, I headed for the hallway door leading back into the kitchen. As I was leaving the main part of the hall, something had caught my eye. It was where the stairs were supposed to be. It was just 2 doors. I paused and gazed over with all the attention I had left in my brain. Suddenly fearing for my safety, I thrashed towards the exit with the mightiest effort I could afford. I could never put Emma in danger like this. I could never forgive myself if something ever happened to her on my hands. On my watch, I was determined not to let anything happen to my best friend in the world. So it was now or never. I was resolute to just get out of here, and fast. But fuck me, everything went black. My vision was completely gone. The last thing I remember feeling were my knees crashing down into the ground with a sudden feeling of failure and misery. The optimistic, determined thoughts once zipping through my head during those final moments were now replaced with total eerie quiet, a lack of understanding and emotion. We had collapsed, together in arms, waiting inevitably for whatever fate we had brought upon ourselves. A queasy, nauseous feeling dominated me when I had regained consciousness. It had taken me a few seconds to recall the events of what just happened earlier. Disoriented, dizzy, and bewildered, the seriousness of the situation had slapped me like a hot, wet towel. The smell of tar was still present, but I was unsure as to whether it wasn't as bad as it was upstairs, or if I had just become used to it. I assumed my eyes would just adjust to the darkness of this indefinite area, which was deceivingly pitch dark. When I turned around then, I was hideously surprised to see a slab of white concrete, like the one in the kitchen, in clear plain sight, just as it was in my dream, like a painting set on a black canvas. No, there's no way. This couldn't be possible. I looked around this room, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. Menacing, brutal, and downright disturbing decorations lingered around this space. Hanging from the ceiling from nooses were dead foxes, dogs, cats, and even small rodents such as ferrets, rats, and even little pet hamsters. Including amongst these were kittens, puppies, and other young animals, all just hanging there. Some had their skin torn off, some had been disemboweled, eyes gouged out, and their teeth pulled from their gums. All of them were different and had their own unique treatment. All animals had a look of pure pain on their faces, something which I never thought I'd ever be able to have to tell. My eyes followed them down from head to toe, analyzing the torture these creatures had just been put through. Puddles of thick crimson blood pooled underneath each carcass, and seemingly almost gathered into one big glossy ruby ocean. This horrifying, brutal image forced me to lean over and projectile vomit all over the floor, making the puke look like it was just bouncing off of nothing. I coughed several times after, spitting up little remains from the contents of my stomach, procrastinating myself from having to look up at these poor animals again. Now, trying my best to seek beyond the mutilated corpses, I slowly put one foot in front of the other to try to find a way out. My sanity was draining, having to walk past it all. Eyeballs, blood, and guts were still dripping from them, with an odd body part landing with a slightly squidgety sound onto my clothing. I kept on walking until I saw something faint in the distance. I stopped and I squinted, still feeling a little dizzy from all the vomiting. But with that, I tiptoed as quick as I could towards the mysterious dot all the while trying my best not to disturb the hanging creatures. As I approached this dot, other dots started appearing in the distance. First, tens, and then I could have sworn hundreds of them. After a spell of squinting, I noticed that these were all paintings. All of them were the same. Every single one I saw was just a painting of a gray eye enclosed in a whitish-gray frame. Just one eye, which covered almost the entire width of the frame, took up about a third of the height and was placed dead center in all of the pictures. I found myself staring into one in particular, even though they were all the same. After a while, pondering about, I started walking in parallel with the paintings. I had no idea where I was, or how big this room was, or even if any of this was real. Was I just dreaming from passing out? I mean, usually my dreams aren't this sophisticated, but for now, I was only focused on finding Emma. If I found her, I could almost assure myself that I wasn't dreaming, as it was once in a blue moon that I had a dream with people involved. I mean, yeah, it happened, but rarely. Now, while thinking about it, I kept one eye on the paintings. They started to slowly evolve realistically. The first few I saw were just plain gray eyes on a black canvas and were pixelated like how you would see on the old Nintendo 64 or something. But as I progressed, they started to become more detailed. Suddenly, while still developing, I paused to stare at one in particular. Bloodshot. I flicked my eyes back to the previous painting. A perfectly healthy eye. I tilted my head to the next one to it, also bloodshot. It was clear to me now that this was part of the puzzling progression. I took another look around the rest of the room. Animals were still hanging and dangling everywhere. I was now convinced that this was a dream. I'd been walking for at least 4 or 5 minutes. I studied my trail, and the hanging creatures littered the room's horizon. There is no way somebody would go to all this effort just to hang those animals from the ceiling. Would they? Huh. I continued forward with constant alternating attention to the paintings and the animals, looking to suss out an upset in the pattern. It was because of this that the smallest little factor had caused me to jump out of my skin with sheer fright. A ringing. I had no idea what it was, but it was very faint. I started to do a mild jog, but keeping alert. To my much unwanted revelation, this ringing was starting to sound a lot like screaming as I started to advance towards the source of the noise. And with that, I halted to a sudden stop. All my surroundings were still the same, the screaming remaining now at a disgusting ambient level. I thought to myself that if I was able to get out of this dream with any ounce of sanity, I would need to take this risk. "Emma!" I roared out with a desperate might. The screaming stopped. All sounds of any sort stopped, the room all of a sudden lacking an echo. A silence so quiet that it hurt my ears. You could hear the sound of your own bodily organs performing their tasks. The fated heart of mine pounding away like the sound of a child banging his milk bottle off his cot. And then that stopped. I was left in this total silence for minutes on end. I tried to look around, but my head wouldn't move. I tried pointlessly running, to no avail either. All I could do was stand around and wait for this mind-numbing phase to stop. And then the alarm went off. Within that second, all the pictures collapsed off the wall and all the animals fell off the ceiling simultaneously. The floor was now a bloodied mess of corpses, ropes, and broken frames. Red paint started leaking from the eyes of the paintings, seeping on the floor and blending in with the blood. The ringing of my phone alarm was now monstrously loud, shaking this realm with a thundering roar. The ringing forced me to curl up into a ball on the ground, holding my ears, while trying and failing to just drown it all out. And out of the corner of my eye, A man and a woman, as pale as mannequins, walked motionlessly hand in hand toward my crippled, tormented body. And with the room still shaking furiously to the deafening, ringing roar of the alarm, and me now drowned in blood, guts, and glass, my eyes started uncontrollably crying. Suffering through it all, I seemed to have no choice but just to start shouting, "No, no, no," over and over again. Each no getting louder to the point that I was starting to cough up blood, my throat torn to shreds from shouting too loudly, and frequently in such a short space of time. I could now feel the words coming out, but I couldn't hear them. The music stopped. The shaking stopped. I was staring into total black and exposed to total quiet once more. My eyes were now stinging from the acidic teardrops gushing from my face, my lower lip dripping blood combined from the fierce biting of it and the constant curdling coughing from my esophagus. I knew what awaited me as I was about to look up, and hesitantly, I steadily jolted my head ever so slowly up towards the ceiling. My eyes made contact with, and were repulsed by, the eerie sight of an all-white bride and groom staring into my soul with ghostly white eyes. They said and did absolutely nothing for the first time that I struggled to get back to my feet. Their heads had followed my every move. Vice versa, I hadn't taken my eyes off of them either. Those eyes were horrific, empty sockets of self-destruction. But I got lost in them somehow. I eventually made it back to a normal stance, my breathing as labored as a marathon runner. Who are you?" I stuttered. How could I not? I didn't know how they were going to react. "You need to wake up," the woman uttered in a monotone voice. "What?" I replied. "You need to wake up." I tried my best to maintain my current facial expression in an attempt to stay calm, cool, and collected. "Just please explain to— Wake up!" This time louder and threatening, while still monotonous. "You need to wake up." Her voice starting to become demented and twisted now. My breathing became heavier. "How do I return?" I asked patiently. "Wake up," she mumbled once more. "Wait, what the fuck?" Her voice now suddenly worn out, as if she was on a caffeine crash. "Please, Tim, I need you to wake up." I shut my eyes and imagined myself making it back to reality. "Emma needs Tim to wake up," she muttered again. Her speech resembled somebody who is sleep-talking. The piano music from earlier started to play again. I shut my eyes and opened them again and again. I was now seeing the same old blackened room, but a slit of light started to glow in the gap between the man and the woman.
"You need to wake up, Tim,"
the woman uttered in what sounded like a dying last-ditch effort. It was then that I noticed that the man was talking as well, but all I could hear was a woman's voice. I contemplated on what to do. I put my left foot forward while staring at the light. I outstretched my arm and quickly gathered walking pace. Slowly but surely I made my way towards the light, the piano banging still throbbing in my head. With the two menacing statue-like beings guarding over me, I felt safe to just now leap into this unknown light. They had made me feel safe. I awakened in a dark room. The only light source came from 4 flaming torches at each corner of it. My hands were tied behind my back, and there was a noose hooked around my neck. Rusty-colored pentagrams scattered the walls, the floors, and the furniture, and I gazed up to see 6 figures standing about 10 feet directly in front of me. Their necks pointed upwards in a religious-like pose, dressed in all black from head to toe, Black gloves, black robes, fuck, black everything. It took me a second to realize that the banging piano music was still there. I searched around frantically to locate the source and discovered something that was engraved in my mind, even still to this day. "Tim, help me, please." Emma struggled to speak over her mindless organ bashing. I could barely make out my surroundings in the dark, but her furious banging of the piano contrasted completely to her almost total limp facial expression. Blinking slowly and going cockeyed, I caught eye of a drip beside her, which was hooked up to her arm. I looked right back at the hooded figures who were staring right at me. My neighbor. Her eyes had that evilness to them, the type of a person you just wanted to vanish. And looking into those eyes, I experienced a resentment like I never thought was possible. My blood boiling and raising as this bat took a step closer towards me. I remained perfectly calm and still, while pouting an angry poker face, but on the inside, fear was tearing me apart like a clumsy chainsaw. Only a few feet away from me now, Emma stopped banging the piano. I looked over at her lifeless body, almost floating on the seat. I squinted once more at this, just a little perplexed, not realizing my concerns were about to be solved. They started chanting 4 words in Latin, in that horrible, monotonous tone that I had to bear once again. The only word I could make out was "et," which I know was the French word for and the other 3 words began with P. As the tone became higher and the chanted words louder, all the pentagrams in the room began to glow, revealing a darkened room similar to the blackened nightmare. Dead goats and chickens missing their heads, hooves, and other various body parts all stuffed into little rabbit cages, all mutilated from what I presumed were satanic rituals. My facial expression no longer able to contain itself, all I could do was roar and screech. I looked back over at Emma, who was now banging the piano once again. I noticed that 4 strings were attached to her, 2 to each arm. My eyes followed the strings up near the ceiling, where I laid my sights on a marionette, which was bouncing up and down by what I understand to be just totally thin air. With the pentagrams now lit up, one of the hooded figures ran up behind me. The chanting continued, but the hooded figures stopped completely, standing there and staring at me. The piano music continued its noisy path. I felt 2 cold, bony hands press against my back. I gripped my teeth and continued to hysterically struggle in the ropes. I heard a whisper in my ear, a cold, almost smoky kind of whisper that seemed to rush through my brain and slice it up. "Goodbye." And without even thinking, I jumped up and gave a mighty bolting kick like a horse to the evil little gremlin behind me. I posed my feet on his abdomen against the wall behind us, my neck now loose in the noose. I lifted up my neck and I pulled my head out, thumping to the ground face first. My nose now stinging, but I didn't give a shit. I now was fully focused on getting out of here. I rolled over onto my back and used my clenched fists to push myself back up to my feet, and by the time I had, the other 4 hooded figures had rushed to the man's aid. I started to escape. Flashbacks of the white-eyed woman began to appear in my mind. "You need to wake up," and running in my mind over and over again. This only made me more determined to escape. All the cages opened up, and the animals started flying towards me. Chicken claws, goat's eyes, even a horseshoe had caught me on the knee. I was in a tremendous amount of pain, but I continued toward the steps that led towards the door. The violent piano music, the pale-eyed woman, and now the twisted ringing flurrying into a harrowing whirlwind of dread and terror. The water now gushing out of my eyes can't even be labeled as tears, as I simply had no emotion. I was simply oblivious to everything around and focused with all my own thoughts. As the 4 hooded figures were now chasing me, I ran into the door, not even a little considered about the pain. The door seemed to quietly dishinge in slow motion as I landed face first into the tiled hallway. I laid eyes upon the front door and gasped in overwhelming joy. I once more rolled onto my back and wiggled as fast as I could backwards towards the door as the hooded man ran with determination. I gazed at them in unobvious despair, as I had now just gave up. My efforts gone unrewarded, it seemed. At least I had tried. But on the contrary, they all miraculously fell to the ground simultaneously as soon as they had gone past the door. Life resumed to normal motion as I watched them suddenly suffer horribly. I caught a glimpse of one of their faces, which were suddenly turning into a burning hot pink and covered in expanding facial boils. Their screams were painful to hear, sure, but at the same time, relieving. I looked up once more above their heads and saw that this was one of the 2 doors that Emma and I had seen earlier before we had collapsed into nothingness. I stood up and ran to the kitchen, remembering the front door was locked, but that Emma had used a picklock to open the back door earlier on. And with one last peek, I saw the spine-chilling basement now totally engulfed in flames, with no sign of that repulsive woman escaping. Good. Let the bitch burn. I hope she stays alive down there forever. Burning. I placed my hands above the flame of a candle in the dining room while glancing at the slab of marble I had encountered earlier. The smell of tar seemed almost inconversant to me now. Latin writing decorated all of it, and one particular sentence had caught my eye. I couldn't remember back then what it had said exactly, but I instinctively knew that it was the same words. The words had now brought back my recent experiences. I spewed vomit all over the floor, along with a few drops of blood. I felt a burn on my hand and heard the rope drop to the floor, the heat from the basement now starting to radiate, and with that, I jerked at the sliding glass door which would lead me back to the synthetic garden and eventually to freedom. But it was locked, of course. I grabbed the candle holder, ran back with all the mighty strength of a desperate creature, flung the object at the window, and it gave out with a mighty smash. I quickly maneuvered through the glass and ran and jumped the green, rotting fence once again. I was home. I entered my house through the conservatory and went through to the bathroom, my noose now red and swollen from my experiences. Little drops of blood decorated my face and clothes, with a big blob hiding just under my nostrils. I stripped naked and I got into the shower, throwing all my clothes in the back of my wardrobe. I wasn't going to be wearing them for a while anyway. I thanked my lucky stars that my parents were gone. There was no way I was going to have to explain anything to them. Now about a month has passed since the events I just described, and I'm sitting on the couch with my father about to watch RTE News. This has been my routine now for the last month. They think it's for a different reason, but I need not explain why. That woman? Why is her house still intact? Why is she still intact? She seems just as normal as ever, like nothing ever happened. I've lost about a stone in weight, but why should I eat much? I have no reason to. I missed all my college exams, and it looks like I'll repeat them in August. If the opportunity even comes around, that is. My parents have been trying to help me for a while now, but they've given up on me at this stage. I've kind of become a statue to them. I don't eat, wash, or interact. Why should I? I know that I haven't much time. The National Police have now launched a national appeal to help find 19-year-old girl Emma Townsend from County Kildare. Emma's described as being 5 feet tall inches with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Emma was last seen leaving her home with her friend during the afternoon of April 28th, wearing navy tights, denim shorts, a white shirt with flowers, and a headband with a daisy in it. She has now been missing for approximately 1 month. The police have encouraged anyone with information to contact them immediately. In other news, many people across County Kildare have come out to pay respects to respected artist Anthony Johnson and his wife Belinda, who both passed away this day 50 years ago. Anthony, who was considered a painting prodigy, would often paint unusual sights, which would include paintings of dead, mutilated animals, close-up of human eyes, and his most famous painting of his hometown with a purple and brown sky and dead vegetation. Wife Belinda was also remembered for her descriptive poetry, which included themes such as death, misery, and depression. Labeled as an Irish Sylvia Plath, her most famous poem, titled Alarm, talks about how the many alarms used throughout the years, linking back to herself, saying the poem was a warning to her own mental health. Other poetry would describe her usual dreams, her hatred of hot and humid weather, about animal instinct, and one poem named Creatures focuses on how any little change to our world could upset the behavior of animals. On May 26, 1963, Anthony had hung himself in his home while his wife was found dead beside him on his piano. The cause of death were both ruled as suicide, as Anthony suffered a broken neck and Belinda suffered an opium overdose. A shot of their graves came on the TV with the words, Probedius proetae et pictori, scrawled across it. I had found out everything, their story, their struggle, and my neighbor's obsession. Both Anthony and Belinda were seen as outcasts by our town. People made false allegations that they were satanic and made sacrifices because of their strange art and poetry. It was only after they couldn't take any more, and both committed suicide, that the town started to respect them. That people realized their talents. I thank Belinda every night for saving me. I fell asleep almost instantly last night. I was sick of people asking me all about it. I didn't want to be reminded of Emma's alleged disappearance. Friends, family, teachers, counselors, they don't care about my well-being. They just want the truth. That night, I dreamed I was walking through a field of flowers, and in the middle of the beautiful plants was Emma, her pale skin glimmering in the sun, her ocean blue eyes reflecting her own beauty. I approached her standing in the same white dress that Belinda once wore when she appeared to me in that dream. I stared at those big, beautiful eyes. Then they turned pale. All the flowers around me suddenly withered and died as quickly as the sky had turned into a mess of dark purple and brown. The banging piano music screeched once as Emma's face turned into the same blank expression as it did in the basement. I felt my neck twist down past my shoulder once more as a maddening grin grew right across my face. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. I saw the blood trickle onto the deceased field as Emma's skin turned into the numbing blue corpse color. Emma is trying to warn me. Belinda is trying to warn me. And I could feel it when my neighbor glances at me. That I know that she is coming for me.
For the longest time, I've been wondering what that was on my wall, because this is all soundproofing, all of this. And I just kind of realized today that I think it's the reflection off of my teleprompter. Anyway, just figured I'd throw that out there. If you guys like an ad-free experience, join me over on Patreon. I'm posting all of my videos over there, probably from a couple months prior to from here on out. It's $3 a month. Helps me, and helps me kind of not depend on YouTube so much. So let's get into this. This one's called No Way Out. Thank God that's over, Dan said to himself as he left the clinic through the sliding doors. It had been one of those days. He'd been caught in a traffic jam in the morning, which made him late for the rest of his appointments for the day.
This led to a lot of abuse from some of his patients who'd had to wait nearly an hour over their scheduled time, which in turn led to him working way past his normal hours. But at least it was over now, and he could embark on the long drive home to his girlfriend, Amy. He knew she would already finish work and would be waiting impatiently for him. He checked his texts, and sure enough, there were a series of messages from her, the last of which read, "I saved you some dinner. It's in the fridge. I hope you like frog's tongue. XOXOXO." He grinned to himself. Of course, it was probably leftover roast from Sunday, but he would have eaten anything, even frog's tongue at that moment. He was so damn hungry. The cafeteria lunches never sufficed. He checked the time on his phone, 5:20. That meant he needed to be at the underground car park in 5 minutes, since it closed at 5:30, which wasn't really a problem. His office was fairly close to the car park, and he'd make it if he hurried. He sent a message back saying he had just finished and would be heading home soon. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, he accidentally bumped into another man. He hadn't been looking and had unknowingly drifted into the other guy's path. The man barely budged, however. It felt like he had just walked into a wall. "Sorry," said Dan. The man stopped and looked at him for a second, quickly mumbling something, and then continued on his way. Though this was a brief encounter, there was something sinister about the way the man had looked at him. It was far too unnerving for just a simple accidental bump. He shrugged it off as just an exaggeration by his tired mind, which had already been finding it hard to think logically during the last hours of his shift, let alone during the last hours of the day. He continued to move through the crowd, which was gaining in size as time went on. It was almost becoming claustrophobic by the time he had made it to the car park. He didn't normally get out this late, and wasn't used to being trapped inside the massive wall of human mass that was 5:30 on a Friday afternoon. Quickening his pace, Dan managed to find a way through the crowd and make it to the door which led into the lobby of the car park. He pushed it open and escaped inside, sighing with relief, the feeling of claustrophobia leaving him for good. He paid for his ticket and pushed the button for a lift going up. He wondered what Hannah was doing, and prayed that the traffic wouldn't be too bad so he could make it home at a reasonable hour. Now recently, things hadn't been going that well between them. Silly little arguments that held no weight but still somehow seemed to drive them apart. He had actually planned on getting home earlier than normal, in order to give them a long time to have a relaxed discussion since the stress of the week had faded. But it was not meant to be. He sighed, and the automated sound of the lift broke him out of his thoughts. He entered the lift and pressed the button for B5, the lowest level of the car park. As he felt the lift begin to descend, he rested his arm on the metal armrest which ran around the interior. Since he'd been late getting into work, and subsequently the car park, he had been denied his usual spot on one of the higher floors. So instead, he had to park on the lowest floor in the entire complex, which really wasn't his cup of tea. It wasn't like he was scared of the dark or anything, but he'd had a bad experience of being locked in the cellar of his own home. He and his brother Alex would go down there regularly to play hide and seek, as it was a fairly large cellar. Down in the darkness, it was hard to see your own hand in front of your face. One of them would wait outside and count, while the other found a place to hide. One particular time, while Dan was finding a place to hide, Alex noticed that their father was returning home from work early, and in his excitement, he completely forgot about the game, and as he ran off, hit the cellar door with the back of his foot. Unfortunately, he didn't notice, and as the cellar door only opened from the outside, Dan was trapped. As the lift doors opened to the dimly lit basement level, and he began walking towards his car, which was the only one left on the level, he began to think about the feeling of being locked in the cellar. He remembered hearing the door shut, and the sudden dread and confusion that filled him. Both he and Alex knew that the door only opened from the outside, so why had he shut it? Was he just trying to mess with him? He had emerged from his hiding place under the old couch and stood up to come face to face with complete darkness. He had never experienced anything like it before. The door to the cellar had always been left open when they played hide and seek. Neither of them had ever dared to shut it. He began to feel uneasy, and then after he had climbed up the ladder and banged on the door to no answer, he began to panic, screaming out and punching so hard that splinters made jagged cuts in his knuckles. He felt as if the air was unbreathable and his heart was going to burst out of his chest. And just when reality began to sink away from him, he had felt a warm sensation of sunlight touching his face. Then he was out of the cellar and in his father's arms, his tears being wiped away. The memories still made him shiver, even today. He shook his head as he unlocked his car and climbed in. He just wanted to get out of this car park basement as soon as possible and get home to Amy. He quickly reversed out and began the ascent to the ground level. As he reached the ground level, he noticed something unnerving. It wasn't any brighter up on the ground floor than it had been in the basement levels. But maybe he was just being irrational. But it was really odd. He felt the same sinking feeling in his stomach when he had been trapped in the cellar by his brother. Sighing, he just shook it off. The car park was almost ready to shut, so they had probably turned off some lights already. In fact, he laughed at it. There was no way he was getting locked in the car park, and he still had plenty of time. But unfortunately, as he rounded the final corner, he came face to face with a closed roller door and a roadblock. This didn't make any sense. He checked his watch again. Still 5 minutes left before the park should have closed. What the hell was going on? Unsure of what to do, he frantically looked around for anyone or anything that could help. This was ridiculous. He could actually see the time on a display near the billboard ads. It read 5:25, and next to it was a neon sign which read, "We shut at 6 p.m. It just didn't make any sense. Well, even if they had shut early, there had to be people still around. He wound down his window and yelled, "Hey, anyone there? Can someone open the door, please?" To no response. This feeling unsettled him greatly. The sound of the cellar door snapped shut, the darkness imprisoning him in an inescapable vice. "Anybody? Can anybody hear me?" Still silence. Dan could hear his own shallow breathing. That's how quiet the car park was. The sound from the outside was seemingly blocked by the steel roller door. He wiped the cold sweat off of his forehead and shakily pulled his head back into the car. There had to be a way out. The first thought that came to his head was trying to smash through the roller door with his car. But it looked too strong, and to begin with, he had to find a way through the roadblock as well. It couldn't have shut down that long ago, though. He only had walked in the car park not 5 minutes ago, and the whole thing had been wide open then. He decided if he could find anyone on the higher levels who might be able to help him. Keeping his panic at bay, he reversed back until he had space to turn around, and then began to drive up to the higher levels. As he drove, he realized he was holding on to the wheels so tight, his knuckles were turning white. No, this isn't happening. Nah, it can't be happening. He tried to brand the idea into his brain. Still, he saw no one. Higher and higher he went, desperately scanning the surroundings for a sign of life, but still he saw no one. The dark cement walls and pillars seemed to close in further and further as he went higher and higher, and finally he reached the top level, and upon seeing no one, he panicked. Where the fuck is everyone?" He screamed, without even bothering to open his window. He punched his steering wheel over and over again, the erratic beeps of the car horn fading into the great nothingness surrounding him. Tears welled up into his eyes as he tried to calm himself. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. There's no fucking way this can be happening. And then, in the cold silence of the car park, he began to sob. Any hope that the situation could be rectified faded, and the feeling of doom overpowered him. The cellar door was now firmly shut, and he was trapped. No. He had to focus. For the first time since realizing he was locked in the car park, he forced himself to calm down. He slowly took in deep breaths. It was irrational to think that this was the end of the world. Sure, he was trapped in a car park which had, for some reason, unknown to him, closed earlier than it should have. But that didn't mean he was going to die or anything. Just like being trapped in the cellar, he would get out eventually. He would have to stay overnight and, unfortunately, not be able to make it home to Amy, which was definitely annoying, but there appeared to be nothing he could do about it. He took another deep breath, reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He briefly considered calling emergency services to see if there was some way that they could help him, but then realized that no police force is going to send an officer down to help out the idiot who got stuck in the car park. So instead, he called Amy, praying that she would pick up and be in a forgiving mood. Come on, he muttered. The ringtone repeated several times and then abruptly ceased. Amy's voice came on the other end in the form of an automated message. Hey there, you've reached Amy. Sorry I can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message after the thing. He sighed. She must have been in the shower or something. I mean, surely if he left a message, she would call him back soon. Hey babe, it's me. I'm really sorry, but somehow I'm trapped in the car park. I honestly don't know what's going on. I got there with enough time to get out before they closed, but when I tried to leave, it was all shut up for some reason, and, well, there's no one around. I know what you're thinking, but anyway, I'm really sorry. If I could find a way out of here, I'll let you know. If not, well, I guess I'll have to sleep in my car and I'll be home as soon as possible tomorrow morning. Again, I'm so sorry. I really wanted to see you tonight so that we can, talk things over. Can't believe this all happened. Call me back when you get this message. I love you. He ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He sat back in his chair and exhaled deeply. He guessed it would be worth checking to see if he could use the lift or the stairs to get down to an alternate exit. He turned his car back on, and as he did, he glanced up into his rear-view mirror and caught a glimpse of something. A man. He was standing behind his car, and from looking in the rear-view mirror, it was as if he was looking directly at him. Dan quickly whipped his head back around to look at him. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit and a mask over his face. The mask looked like it was forged from hard steel, with jagged edges and sharp points. The mask covered his whole face, with dark eye holes and a vertical mouth hole, which looked like a tiny chamber. Dan didn't know what to do. He looked like a madman, but as far as he knew, this guy was the only other human being in the car park. His only hope for escape. He had no chance but to ask him for help. Dan wound down his window. Hello, can you help me? Dan didn't get to finish because he was interrupted by the crunching sound of his back window shattering. The man had an axe and had just broken the back windshield. In an instant, he had lunged into the car and was about to swing the axe into Dan's chest. Dan screamed and violently reversed the car to the left, causing the man's aim to be off by a fraction. The axe cut through the seatbelt and Dan's shirt, barely missing his skin. The man was thrown off balance as this happened, slamming into the left side door. He could hear the man panting like an animal, readying itself for another attack. But Dan couldn't stop driving. He knew that. But he had to keep moving side to side or the man in the car would surely tear him to shreds. So he constantly swayed the car, his hands gripping the wheel like a castaway holding on to a lifesaver. Dan twisted and turned the car as the man swung wildly with the axe. The first swing the man made connected just behind Dan's head, slicing off his headrest. Dan screamed and banked the car hard right, causing the man to lose his grip on the axe, dropping it under the passenger side seat. "What do you want?" Dan cried out, on the brink of descending into madness. The man still didn't say anything, but instead suddenly reached over and covered Dan's eyes with his hands. Terror filled him. Darkness beckoned. He fell further and further down the pit. He fell farther and farther away from Amy, her face disappearing into the nothingness. The cellar door wouldn't open. He was hitting it and hitting it, but no one was coming. Not this time. No. No, please. He finally broke out of his daze and slammed his foot down on the brake. The car shuddered violently, and Dan felt the man rise over the top of him, allowing him to see again. The instant his eyes opened, he saw the man impact the windscreen and the glass shattering like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. Dan closed his eyes again and shielded himself as best he could, but he still felt burning pain shooting up his arms and legs as shards of glass penetrated his clothing and sunk into his skin. He slowly opened his eyes and surveyed the chaos. Luckily, he hadn't smashed into anything. He had managed to stop before reaching any of the cars parked in the reserved bay area. The man was not so lucky, though. He had flown through the windshield and landed on top of a small car. It looked as if he was sunken in. Like his impact was so great, it had actually dented the top of the car. Ignoring the pain, Dan tried to gather his thoughts. He had to try and ring the police, but he couldn't stay where he was. There was too great a chance that the man was still alive, whoever he was. But for some reason the car seemed to have stopped. Maybe he had stalled it somehow. Keeping his eyes on the motionless body of the killer, Dan turned the key in the ignition, and nothing happened. No, he muttered fervently, turning the key again and again to no reaction from the engine, and finally he gave up, slamming his hands on the steering wheel in frustration. He then grasped the door handle, desperately pulling it and pushing the door open. He had to at least put some distance in between himself and the man. He put his leg out of the door, but as soon as he put pressure on it, pain shot right along his limb. He shuddered in pain, quickly bringing his leg back inside the vehicle. His only option was try and crawl. He desperately pushed the door further open and then rested his hands on the ground, pulling himself forward. Blood leaked from the areas of his legs and arms that the glass had penetrated, but he gritted his teeth and pushed himself to continue. After distracting himself at least 2 meters away from the car and even further from the man, with his last ounce of strength, he pushed himself onto his back, groaning as he did so. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it. There was a message from Amy there, and as much as it broke his heart, he couldn't read it at the moment. He needed the police. Frantically, he dialed 000, his thumbprints lacing the screen with blood. The dial tone sounded for a few moments before an operator picked up. "Hello, what's your emergency?" the operator said. Dan swallowed, trying to regain his composure. "Yeah, my name is Dan Lewis. I'm at the car park on 87th Street, and I'm being attacked by a tall man with an axe. Please, you have to help me. I need the police, like, right now." "Okay, Dan, you're going to be okay. We've just sent a squad to your location. Now I just need you to relax and answer a few questions. Firstly, what is the current condition of the man? Are you being pursued by him now?" No. He got into my car and attacked me. I was driving and I managed to hold him off by swerving from side to side, but he covered my eyes. So I braked and he flew through the windshield and landed on a car. I think he may be unconscious, but I don't think he's dead, although he hasn't moved since it happened. Okay, so what is your condition? I can't walk. I've been injured by glass from the windshield. How long is it going to take for those guys to get here? They should be there within a half an hour. Sir, how far away are you from the person in question? I'm not that far. I'm about... Dan trailed off. As he had turned his head in the direction of the car to look at where the man should have been, he instead came face to face with the man's mask. Help me, please, Dan screamed into the phone as the man wrenched it out of his hand and threw it away. What do you want from me? Dan cried out. The man placed his hands on Dan's shoulders, lifting him up. Barely straining at all, the man threw Dan through the air, and he landed back first on the windscreen of the family car. He grunted. Immense pain shot up his back, like a hot knife sliding through his spinal cord. He twisted and contorted, unable to find any relief. The man then walked back to where Dan's car was and pulled the passenger side door open. He bent down to retrieve something, and with a cold feeling of fear, Dan realized that the man must have been getting his axe. This was it then. He was helpless. There was no way he could escape if he couldn't walk. He knew he needed to buy time until the police arrived, but that was close to impossible to do now. He just wished he could say goodbye to Amy in some way. He was almost starting to regret ringing the police instead of calling her. It had all worked out to naught now. The man, now with the axe in his hand, slowly walked back to him as if he was taking his time, savoring the moment of Dan's demise. Anger began to rise and conquer Dan's fear of death. "Just do it already," he screamed at him. "Do what?" said the man as he reached Dan. Dan choked on his words, not expecting the man to actually speak. It had caught him off guard, and now he didn't know what to say. "Kill you? You think that would be an adequate punishment?" the man said. His voice was very deep and guttural, but something about it was familiar. The sound of it pulled at something in the depths of his memory. He just didn't know what it was. And what did he mean by adequate punishment anyway? What? What are you Dan was cut short by the man swinging his axe and driving it into Dan's left foot. Blood spurted out of the wound, and the axe man holding the axe so that the blade stayed in his foot. The pain was unbearable. Dan twisted and turned, screaming and shouting, but the man held fast to the end of the axe. He refused to let the pain end for Dan. "Answer me," he said. "Answer me, or I'll just leave it in." Dan choked back the tears now welling in his eyes. "No," he screamed, and the man paused before pulling the axe clean out of Dan's foot. Dan shuddered violently, and his body began shaking from the agony. The tears were now flowing down his cheeks, though he still did not know what the man meant by adequate punishment. Punishment for what? Still, it was good that he appeared to be taking his time, no matter how painful it was. He needed to find a way to stall him. He had to ignore the pain. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses," said the man, almost chuckling. He leered over Dan so that they came face to face, those endless eye sockets disappearing into nothingness. "You thought I'd never get out, didn't you?" he said, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know what you mean," said Dan, barely getting the words out. The man laughed evilly, placing his hand on top of Dan's hair and pulling it back so that Dan's head lay flat on the bonnet of the car. He then pushed his foot down on top of Dan's injured left leg. Dan screamed and thrashed violently. The man leaned in so that his mouth was right next to Dan's ear and whispered, You know all about the cellar door." I got locked in the cellar by my brother as a child, Dan screamed out. No, you didn't, growled the man, grinding his foot further into the open wound, blood leaking out at an even faster pace. Why don't you tell me the truth? Nothing more, nothing less, said the Axeman. I, stammered Dan. His mind was reeling. Sirens faintly echoed in the background. The police were arriving. Say it, yelled the man, now holding his axe with both hands poised above Dan's head. I locked you in the cellar, cried Dan, the pain overcoming his senses. He had finally fit all the pieces together. He had known his attacker all along. It was his brother Alex. He and Alex were in fact conjoined twins who had been removed from one another through an extensive surgical procedure. However, there was one slight twist. Their minds were never really separate. They had decreased over age, but they shared all their earliest memories, which was why Dan recalled Alex being stuck in the cellar and took it as his own memory. The reason Alex had been locked in the cellar was that he had not responded to the surgery well at all. While Dan had survived with barely any defects, Alex became hostile and developed an antisocial personality. He disobeyed his parents regularly and often tried to kill Dan. Their mother had pleaded to their father to take Alex to a hospital, but they had refused. The father had never been quite well mentally either, though their mother had stuck with him because she loved him deeply. Their father decided to imprison Alex in their cellar. To achieve this required a risky ploy, having Dan coax Alex into playing hide-and-seek with him. They only did this when Alex was in a good mood. It took a while, but eventually Dan was able to convince him to come and play. When it was Alex's turn to hide, Dan had climbed out of the cellar, and his dad had slammed the door shut tight, leaving his son to die. That was the last Dan had ever seen of Alex, until tonight. Somehow he must have found a way to survive and eventually break out, and now, somehow, some way, he had found him in this car park. You took your time. Are you that much of a coward? Said Alex. I never wanted to do it in the first place, protested Dan. The sirens grew louder. He had just had to hold him back for a few more moments. Alex appeared to be so wrapped up in their confrontation that he hadn't noticed the sirens yet. Or maybe he just didn't care. That's your excuse? That's your excuse for making me live in that hell? There's only so much air in that cellar, Dan, and there's only so many insects that you can eat. He trailed off, his words already having made their full impact on Dan, who was rapidly losing color in his face. You can't rid yourself of your sins, Daniel, said Alex, raising the axe far above his head. Sometimes you just have to live with them. And Alex swung the axe. Dan tried to avoid it. He lurched to the left as the axe came down, but the blade landed in the side of his neck. Blood began leaking into Dan's lungs, making it difficult to breathe. He could vaguely hear Alex laughing. Oh, that felt so damn good, Dan. You just have no idea, he shouted with joy. How about I do it again? I never liked the look of my face, so why should you? He said, laughing. Dan, barely able to speak at this moment, gritted his teeth tightly. Did you know that a poet once said that out of all the combination of words in the English language, cellar door was the most beautiful, said Dan. And at that moment, a loud gunshot blasted through the car park. Alex's head exploded as the bullet found its way through the flesh on the back of his head and forced its way out through the metal mask. He dropped the axe. It landed with a loud clang, and then his head fell backwards. His knees bent so that he was in much the same position that Dan was, and an officer appeared at Dan's side. Police, ambulance should be here for you shortly. Is there anyone we could contact for you? Anyone at all? Dan coughed violently, blood leaking out of his neck and onto his shirt. Amy. I need Amy. That was not the last thing he said before everything went black, however. The next day, Dan awoke in a hospital bed. He felt as if he had been asleep for a year. Amazingly, he could breathe fine, though there was a little pain involved. It was at that moment that Amy's face came into his view. "Oh my God, you're alive," she said jubilantly, tears of happiness filling up in her ice blue eyes. She bent down, kissed him hard on the lips, and then embraced him passionately. Dan wrapped his arms around her, but at the same time a strong sadness overwhelmed him. He began to cry into her top, letting out all the emotions that had been trapped inside him since he had been locked in the car park. "I'm so sorry. It's all my fault," he wept. "Shh, it's not, okay? Let's not talk about it for now," she said calmly in a way that made him feel good. "I love you so much," he said. "I love you too," she said, kissing him once more. She finally let go of him and stood up. "Okay, now, the first matter of business is..." But before she could finish, she was interrupted by a beeping emanating from her pocket. She frowned, but ignored it. "Anyway, as I was saying, the first matter of business is, I'm allowed to tell you that recovery will take a while, but you should eventually be able to breathe without a machine. The bad news is, you won't have your foot anymore, but you could get a prosthetic one. They were saying that they're really easy to fit and stuff. You'll just have to get used to it," she said brightly. "It sounds good to me, but I think we could discuss all that stuff soon. Right now, I'm so hungry. Does this place have good food?" he said, and Amy laughed. "They sure do," she said. "I'll call a nurse and stuff, and I'm sure we could get you something." "Great," replied Dan. Later on, after Dan had explained everything to Amy over lunch, she sat by his bedside while he enjoyed some much-needed sleep. She still couldn't believe all that had happened, and that Dan had managed to live through it all. She had already known about the story of Alex, but it was still a shock to find out that he had managed to catch up with Dan. They had both assumed that he had died in that cellar. While she flicked through a magazine, she remembered that she had never checked the text that she had received while talking to Dan. She pulled out her phone, and as she read the message, her blood ran cold. It was sent from Dan's phone, which the police force had been unable to recover at the crime scene. "Hey baby, I can't wait to see you tonight." James Anderson III stared down at a stainless steel table smudged with greasy fingerprints from God knows how many doomed inmates before him. Sitting unceremoniously on top of the table was a grayish-white plastic plate filled to its edges with diner-style breakfast platter. It included 3 fried eggs over easy, overdone, grits with butter, ice cold, 3 strips of bacon that were undercooked, hash browns which were overcooked, and 2 pieces of toast cut into triangles. A single pack of butter and a single jelly-labeled fruit medley sat on top of the cold toast. James stared at it a while longer. The thought of putting any of this into his mouth and swallowing made his stomach turn thrice over. The last meal, the last practical joke of his life. You would have to be completely insane to have an appetite at a time like this, he thought. The only reason he chose the plate of grease as his farewell dinner was because it reminded him of happier times with his family. The only happy memories he could recall were the ones of him and his little sister. When they were kids and his mom had a little extra money, she would take them to the diner at the edge of town. They would sit at the counter and his sister, Sarah, would get waffles with powdered sugar and syrup. Sometimes the cook would sprinkle chocolate chips on them, and she would grin ear to ear, arranging the little chocolate morsels into eyes, a mouth, and a nose to make a friendly, waffle-faced creature on her plate. James always got the working man special, to seem more like an adult. It came with fried eggs that bled a rich, creamy yolk when poked, crispy bacon, hash browns, and a thick stack of toast with butter and jam. But in truth, he often looked longingly at his sister's waffle plate, but he had concluded that only babies ordered that kind of stuff, and at 12, he had thought of himself as nearly a man. Those times were worlds and worlds away. The reality was that being a man had turned out to be one big, sick joke. A curse, he thought now, looking at his last meal. The platter in front of him, all these years and worlds later, was a poor imitation of the breakfasts he remembered from the diner. James stared some more, eyes widening at the thought of his younger self and the long, tortuous path he had walked to get where he was today. "Not even going to take a bite?" the guard asked from his post at the doorway. James shook his head slowly back and forth. "And after all that trouble we put into making you your special dinner." "Huh. Talk about gratitude," the guard replied. James knew he was trying to get a reaction out of him. The guard hated him. Hell, they all hated him. Everyone looked at him like a piece of shit on the sidewalk, like something disgusting and unwanted, a smudge upon their good, clean world. The guard knocked on the glass of the closed door, signaling someone to come in, take him back to his cell. James was glad for it. The smell of the congealing food was making him sicker by the minute. Minutes, he thought. How many do I have left? Another guard entered, unlocked the chain from the steel chair that was attached to James' handcuffs, and walked him out the door and into the hallway. He walked down the hallway and could see the other inmates in their cells, staring out at him with faces like floating masks. One was a grotesquely exaggerated mask of sorrow. Another was a fool's mask, cross-eyed and deranged. The fool laughed at him as he walked by. Another looked like a devil, reaching through the bars at him. The guard slammed his nightstick on the bars of the cell, and the inmate jumped back, his face returning to normal. James stared at him as he walked by. They locked eyes, and the inmate, a middle-aged white man with thinning gray hair and a wiry build, ran his thumb horizontally across his neck and then waved goodbye. James was taken back to his cell to wait for the audience to arrive. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and it was to be carried out on that day, June 10th, 1992. The guard locked the cell door and looked through the bars at him. Today's a beautiful day for killing scumbags," he said before walking away with a little spring in his step. James wondered if they really believed he was guilty. He was an innocent man. He had only been a teenager when he was first jailed, accused of horrible things. Sometimes, late at night, he tried to imagine doing those things that they said he did, but he couldn't. Sometimes the world twists in ways that make you question your own reality, he thought. Maybe I'm crazy. Hell, maybe I did do it. He put his head in his hands and was surprised to find that he had more tears to cry. He let them out, almost savoring the sensation. Everything was his last. What would be the last thing he saw? What would be his last thought? He wanted it to be about his mother and sister. He had planned to close his eyes in that final moment and imagine an alternate reality, one in which his father hadn't died when he was 4, and his mother had never gotten remarried to a man who had repeatedly abused him and his sister. In this alternate world, James had gone to college and met a girl, and they both worked hard to build a life together. They would have one daughter, maybe, who he would name Sarah, after his sister. They would buy a little house somewhere, maybe even in another state. He would move his sister and his mother to Maine, maybe, He had never been there, but his father had, and he had shown him pictures when he was a little boy. It seemed like a beautiful place. They would live there in a little cottage and smell the pine trees and the salty sea, and be happy. He would picture that life from beginning to end as they injected him with the poison that would kill him. Maybe death would take him there if he was lucky. James was pulled out of his fantasy by footsteps approaching his cell. They were heavy and slow. He didn't recognize them. He knew the sound of all the guards' footsteps, and these didn't match. They got louder until a pair of old, worn-out penny loafers stopped in front of his cell. James looked at the shoes and then scanned up from the faded corduroy pants, the pot belly stretching the buttons of a beige button-down shirt, a brown and yellow striped tie, tweed jacket, and finally up to the round head of the man. His thin lips were mostly hidden by graying mustache, and his nose was round and red, with long dark hairs poking out. His eyes, a greenish-brown, shone out at James from behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. "Hello, James," the man said, and smiled guiltily at having intruded on his solitude. "My name is Mr. Archon. I have just a wee bit of paperwork here for you to sign before the big event," he said while rooting through a pile of papers in a folder. He looked at the grim look on James's face and corrected himself. "Well, that is to say, your execution, to be frank." "Hey, what do you know? That's my first name. Call me Frank if you like," he said with a self-conscious chuckle. "Are you a lawyer?" James said, mostly just to say anything. He was not expecting to see anyone else before they took him to the execution room. As if in response to his question, the cell door slid open with a metallic clang. Mr. Archon stepped into the room and the door slid closed behind him. James was surprised the guards would use the automatic unlock system for this. He assumed. Unarmed civilian to visit his cell, but here he was, stepping into the cell of a supposed murderer without the slightest hesitation. The rest of the cell block was eerily silent. James had gotten used to the continuous sound of shouting, jeering, begging, and quite often, praying. He wondered who they thought they were praying to. The guilty had no business asking for mercy, and the innocent had obviously been left to rot by either a pitiless god or the absence of any god at all. James believed the latter was more likely. What kind of god would deal out a fate like this? It was a sick joke indeed. "James Anderson, III, yes, indeed," Mr. Archon said as he found the paper he was looking for. He pushed his glasses up onto his stubby nose again and again as they slid down relentlessly towards the paper. "Well, Mr. Anderson, I'm not a lawyer, but a clerk of the state sent to tie up the loose ends of your case." "With all due respect, Frank, my case has so many loose ends. I'd be surprised if you could tie them up in the few minutes that I have left." Mr. Archon looked at James with an almost comically exaggerated expression of pity. He pouted his bottom lip and shook his head. "What a world we live in that deals out such a fate to a young man such as yourself. Tut tut. Really is a shame to meet you under such bleak circumstances, but alas, here we are. And there are still a few things we can accomplish before your time comes to an end." Mr. Archon shuffled over to the metal bed and sat down, laying his battered briefcase on its side. He popped the latches and shuffled through another mound of disorganized paperwork, whistling a little tune as he searched. James stood there staring at the man, feeling that familiar wave of unreality wash over him. This could all be a bad dream, he thought. Mr. Archon's whistling took on a strange tone as the notes lilted up and down in a sad melody he recognized from somewhere. He closed his eyes and remembered his 13th birthday. He had just turned 13 years old. He was sitting in his bedroom, waiting for his mom to get home from work. That summer he had taken up a job cleaning houses, and he spent a lot of time alone. At the time, she was also married to her second husband, Tom. Tom was a traveling salesman that was often on the road, which was A-OK with James. Tom was a bad man. It was the only way his young brain had been able to put into words what kind of monster Tom was. He told his mom one time that Tom was a bad man and she hadn't believed him. She said he had to stop reading those pulp comics. "They're turning your brain to mush," she had shouted defensively. But it wasn't the comics that had ruined his brain. It was the bad things that a bad man named Tom had been doing. On that day of his 13th birthday, Tom had come home to surprise James with a gift. He had come whistling up the walkway, whistling into the house, and whistling up the stairs to James' bedroom door. It was a slow, cascading tune that turned James' blood to ice. "James, the birthday boy," Tom said outside the door with a flourish of little knocks. Tom opened the door and stood there in his shabby tweed jacket and faded corduroys, holding a wrapped gift. James sat frozen on the bed, hoping he would turn to stone and be unbreakable. He had hoped for it many times before, and sadly, he had remained flesh and bone. Tom had sat on the bed next to him, smiling like a lunatic. "Well, go on. Open it," he said. "Mom will be home soon. I'll open it when she gets home," James had whispered, never taking his eyes off of his shoes. His mind was already separating from his body, taking him to the alternate reality he had dreamed of every day since his father had died. "Why don't you be a good boy and open it right now?" Tom said with a sudden, biting intensity. He pushed the hair back from James' forehead and stroked his cheeks. James' consciousness had blessedly floated up to the ceiling to watch the horror from afar, as it had done during the previous visits Tom had made to his room when his mother wasn't around. "Here we are, Mr. Anderson," Mr. Arkins said gleefully with the paper clutched to his chubby fist. James opened his eyes to find himself back in the cell. "Why don't you be a good boy and sign right here for me, please?" He held out the crumpled paper in one hand and a pen in the other. James stared at the man in his cell. With dawning horror, he realized that he was looking at an aged version of his stepfather, Tom. He jumped back against the cell door, clutching himself tightly as he had as a child, trying to turn to stone. Now, James, there's no reason to be frightened. It's just a simple form stating that you're a very bad man who has done very bad things. You're dead. I saw it in the paper. You died 15 years ago. You're dead, James whispered, clutching himself tighter. His whole body shook. Mr. Archon's smile widened. His eyes, which had seemed greenish-brown before, looked yellow now. His glasses slid down his sweaty nose again, and those dead yellowed eyes stared nakedly at James' terrified face. They were the eyes of a corpse. I'm not dead, James. You're dead. Dead as a doornail, in fact. He cackled and threw back his head with glee at his own cleverness. The thing that called itself Frank Archon stood up, and James watched in sick horror as one of his shirt buttons popped off of his bloated purple belly. The smell of decay filled the cell, and James turned and gripped the bars, pressing his face against them to look for a guard. Help me! Help me! James screamed into the silent hallway. A hand gripped his shoulder and he screamed. He turned around and looked into the face of his mother. James? She sobbed. She stepped back towards the bed and picked up one of the crumpled pieces of paper from Mr. Archon's pile. James looked wildly around the cell. There was no sign of the Mr. Archon/Tom creature. He looked back at his mother, who was wearing one of her old house dresses. Her graying hair was coming loose from her unusually neat bun. She looked very old and tired. She was looking at the piece of paper with her hand over her mouth, aghast. James, how could you? she said. "Mom? What are you doing here? What's happening?" he screamed, shaking and crying. "Breaking and entering. Murder. Rape. What did you do to that old woman? How could you?" she said, backing away from him, shaking her head. "You know I didn't do any of that. You know that. They framed me," he shouted back at her. "Your sister is so disappointed in you," she said. No, James said, sliding down the bars to the floor. "I'm a statue, made of stone, and nothing can break me," he thought desperately. He cupped his elbows and made himself small, shuddering and gasping for air. "Somebody stop this. Somebody help me," he said quietly to no one. "Why won't anybody believe me?" he screamed, but there was no reply. The silence engulfed him. He felt paralyzed in fear and sorrow, and for a single moment, he believed he really had turned to stone. A marble monument to his own suffering. Here stood a boy who was fed nothing but pain, and in payment was handed a death sentence for heinous crimes he did not commit. Justice is dead. Life is a sick joke. The end. An eternity passed, and the silence coaxed James out of his paralysis. He opened his eyes. A woman sat on his bed. A stranger. Her presence calmed him. She was young and beautiful. Her green eyes glowed out of her face with sharp, comely features. Her dark hair cascaded past her shoulders, shiny and smooth. She wore an expensive-looking black suit, tailored to perfection. She had one leg crossed over the other, and a foot with a pointy black high-heeled shoe bouncing up and down. She looked completely at home and elegant in a jail cell on death row. "What is this? Am I going crazy?" he asked the woman. "No, James. You just took a trip through your own brain," she said with a calm smile. "My mother, she thinks I really did those things," he cried with the heartbreaking strength of a child. "No, dear. She's waiting for you in the audience. She and your sister are heartbroken that you're paying for the sins of someone else. They believe you, and I believe you." I just don't understand," he said. His tears dried up last, and he sat in stunned silence, waiting for something, anything, to make all of this stop. "Mr. Archon was Tom. He's dead. He was here," he said. "No, I am Mr. Archon," she said with the patience of a mother talking to her beloved toddler. "You?" "Yes, James. I'm Mr. Archon. I showed you those things. I don't want you to die without realizing the full extent of your misfortune. I want you to feel the injustice that has been done to you. Your life was worth so much more, and these people took it from you. Tom, the lawyers, the guards, all the people sitting out there waiting excitedly for you to die in front of them. But I never did those things, and they don't know me," he said. "I know that, my love," she said as she stood up. She reached down with perfectly manicured nails and took his hands into hers. He suddenly felt a warm, spreading joy that he had never known before rush throughout him. She pulled him to his feet and looked down at him. She was at least a foot taller than he was. "James," she said as she tilted her head and arched one of her exquisitely dramatic eyebrows. "Did you know that when your mother and sister were seated on the family side of the execution room just now, the mob on the other side threw things at them?" "No," he said. "Did you know that one man spat in your sister's face and called her a slut?" No. "Did you know that they're sitting in there right now, cursing your dear mother and sister for simply being related to a monster, such as yourself?" James shook his head no and looked down at the floor. He felt his cheeks go hot with the beginning of a deep rage. "They're going to cheer when you take your last breath. When you think your last thought, they'll be laughing and smiling, and your family will walk out of there humiliated and harassed, probably for the rest of their lives. But it's not their fault, James said, clenching his teeth. Well, of course not. It's these people, she said with a voice that echoed in his head through all the years of his life, all the injustices he had been dealt for simply being born. Wrong place at the wrong time, and fuck, here comes the punchline, he thought through a thickening red curtain of anger. James squeezed his eyes shut and clenched his fist tight enough to make his fingernails draw blood in the soft pads of his hands. He gulped in the rancid air of his cell and screamed with every ounce of energy he had left. When the last of the howl had escaped him, he fell to his knees, panting. "What can I do? What can I do?" he said. "Do you believe in immortality?" she replied. "I don't know what you mean," he said, looking up into her beautiful face. "I am the bringer of justice for lost souls. You deserve revenge. What will your last thought be, James?" I don't know. I want my family to be happy." "No," she said, her eyes flickering like flames. Suddenly, James' mind went blank. It was a relief. He could see himself standing in the blackness. Beside him was a figure in a black robe. A rotted hand reached out from beneath the cloak and pointed down. He looked down off a precipice into a never-ending pit of flames. They ebbed and flowed like the sea. Bodies were writhing down there, screaming and screaming. He saw Tom and the judge that convicted him, and the lawyers that failed him, and all those people who were so excited to see him die. And he smiled at their suffering. Mr. Archon's voice rang out beside him, and he was back in the cell. "Your death is inevitable, but a curse will last forever," she, he, it said. James could hear the guard's footsteps approaching. It was time. He smiled up at Mr. Archon, and she smiled back. The guard opened the gate and grinned at James. He did not seem to notice the tall Mr. Archon standing behind him. He put James in handcuffs. "Showtime," the guard said, and walked him out of his cell. James looked over his shoulder and smiled at his tall friend, who nodded back at him. Two guards opened the double doors to the holding area of the execution room. James could hear the crowd murmuring on the other side of the wall. His mind was clear. He knew what his last thought was going to be. The head guard nodded to the others, and they took him out to face the audience. A roar of noise erupted as soon as he emerged from behind the curtained area. One side of the room was filled with people screaming at him, their faces red with fury, some with tears and some with smug smiles. On the other side, separated by metal bars, sat his mother and his sister. They were the only ones there to mourn him. They were both crying and sat up straight when they saw him. He made eye contact with his sister and gave her a smile. The crowd grew louder at the sight of that. He looked at his mother and mouthed the words, "I love you." "Devil bitch," someone shouted at his mother. James turned to see the man and saw flesh of him burning in a pit of flames until he was nothing but blackened bones. The bones continued to beg for mercy, and the man shrank back at James's stare and shouted no more. The guards walked him over to a gurney. He lay down willingly and stared at the ceiling, feeling as strong as stone as they tied his arms and legs down. Once he was strapped down, the man in charge of the operation, Master of Death, James thought, somewhat amused, asked him if he had any last words. He did. James turned and looked at the audience. "My life has been filled with pain and horror. The injustices done to me and my family can never be fully repaid, but I can try. Today I will be put to death for crimes I did not commit. Not only do you condemn me, but you condemn my family, who deserve none of this. I've had a day of lasts. My last meal, my last piss, my last cry, my last conference with demons. I do not mourn my last day on this earth because I believe in immortality. My body may perish today in front of you, but you will not be rid of me. I curse you. I curse all of you who came to see me die. I curse the ones who worked to take my life away, and those of you who did nothing to stop me. I curse the bad men who have hurt me over the years, and I curse this world for being what it is. I curse your blood. I curse every person who is born of your bloodlines, and in this curse I will live on. You think you've put this all behind you? I will be that chill that grazes your neck on a dark street. I will be the fear that creeps up on you and consumes you for the last years of your life. I will be the sickness that takes your wife, your child, and your own sinful heart. And in your nightmares I will live. In the deepest pits of your own hell, I will wait for you to join me. I am immortal in your suffering. Mom, Sarah, I love you, and I always will. But the rest of you could go straight to fucking hell. The crowd surged and had to be held back by the guards. The needles were inserted into the veins of each arm, and the poison injected. James looked at his family one last time and willed them to remember him as a good man. His sister sat up and screamed his name. "James," she sobbed. His mother stood and pulled her close, kissing her head. She looked up at her son. "I love you, my sweet boy," she mouthed to him. James smiled at them both. The sound of the crowd was nothing but background noise to him. He turned his head slowly and looked up at the ceiling, feeling the poison rush in through him. There on the ceiling above him was Mr. Archon. She was up there in the shadows, just a pair of yellow eyes staring at him with joy. James closed his eyes and died, happy that justice had finally prevailed. Luke had an unexplainable feeling that someone was watching him. He hasn't been able to think about much else since he woke up. He isn't usually the type to get paranoid, but it was beginning to creep him out. "Christ, Luke, will you just give it a rest?" George asked, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "You've been at it for an hour now. I told you I'll fix the damn thing later." Luke sneered at his roommate. He knew it wouldn't get done otherwise. George, to put it bluntly, was a freeloader. If you ask the bastard to do anything, he'll take about a half an hour before he finally decides he'll start. "You're a history buff, right?" George asked in a bizarre tangent. "Yeah, I guess you could put it like that. It's a pretty interesting subject," Luke replied, disappointed that George had forgotten that he was studying to be a history teacher. "Alright, well, I got a joke for you. Why did the Spanish go through with the Inquisition?" "George, aren't you Jewish?" "Dude, just ask me why. Come on." "Okay, why did the Spanish go through with the Inquisition?" "Because nobody could torquemada it," George answered, trying to desperately hold in the laughter. Luke didn't laugh. "Oh, come on, man. You gotta admit, that was a pretty good joke." "Will you shut up and give me some help?" Luke said, slightly irritated. George got up after taking a quick sip of beer and walked towards him. He felt a little bit guilty for snapping at him like that. It wasn't his fault, after all. Luke was just on edge lately. At first it was because of Mary. Now it was because of the feeling that he was being watched. Mary was his girlfriend. His ex-girlfriend now, he guessed. Things didn't work out between them. Things just got repetitive and monotonous for her. Luke wouldn't really describe himself as a boring person. Just the guy who doesn't want to get shit-faced and wake up hungover every other morning. But the one thing he knew about Mary was that she was a really lively person. She loved to exercise, party, and practically never stood still. Luke had nicknamed her Mako, after their half-in-the-bag visit to the aquarium. Surprisingly, this was one of the only things he remembered about that night. Underneath the shark tank, there was a little sign for the Mako shark. It said this type of shark needed to keep moving in order to get water into their gills so that they could breathe. If the shark stopped moving, it would die, just like Mary. Luke shook his head. All right, it was a pretty good joke, Luke said, chuckling to himself. He saw the smile beginning to form on George's face. A few hours later, Luke was getting ready to leave when George came out of his room. "Where are you off to?" George asked. "I have to go to Greg's house. He asked me to feed his cats while he was away," Luke replied. "Greg? Oh, I fucking hate that guy. He's such a self-pitying piece of shit. Not to mention that his breath smells like he gave Donkey a rim job," George replied, the smell of alcohol clinging to his breath. "Nah, Greg's a good guy. I've known him since high school, man. He's been through some shit. Listen, you don't need to be so hard on him." "Whatever. Oh, and by the way, Trish stopped by. She was wondering if you wanted in on the league again this year." George was talking about the fantasy football league. "I'm not entirely sure. I didn't really enjoy it as much as I wanted to last year." Luke was refraining from bringing up his fight with Mary at one of their parties last year. The league would get together on Sundays to watch whatever game was on TV. He couldn't even remember how it started, but he did remember the long taxi ride home. Mary had driven them there, so when the fight got out of hand, she left him at the party and went back to her apartment. "Well, I know, man, it just felt so bureaucratic last year. I mean, who cares if I didn't get my waivers in on time? I thought we were just doing this for fun." Once again, George could only think of himself. He wasn't a bad guy, just oblivious. It was a well-appreciated contrast to Luke's parents. Luke's mother expected great things of her son. She had come to this country from China in the early 80s and met his father a few years later. His mother always wanted Luke to succeed, even when success seemed impossible. That was something Luke always hated about her. She had fully adopted the idea of the American dream, not realizing that at least some failure is going to follow suit when you try to achieve it. His father was an American, coming from a family of Irish immigrants on both sides. Most of his anxiety had been because of his mother, who pushed him to pursue a job in medicine. Luke hated the sight of blood, something his mother never even bothered asking him when she decided he was going to become a surgeon. It wasn't entirely her fault, though. Luke had been too passive with her, never able to speak his mind until he was around 20, when he told her that he was going to become a teacher. After his father's death, his mother has been more persistent. She calls every couple of weeks to ask if he would consider reapplying to medical school. Luke left the house and got into his car. The feeling hadn't left him yet. He was beginning to wonder if someone was actually watching him. There'd be no reason for anyone to be watching him, right? He started his car and began to drive. It was only after 20 minutes of driving when Luke realized that the car behind him had been tailing him for a while now. This couldn't be coincidence. He was getting closer to Greg's house, just a little bit further, and if the guy was still following him, then he'd call the cops. The tinted windows of the car behind him didn't help with his paranoia. He eventually reached the house and parked in front. Luke looked at the rear-view mirror to see the car pulling around the corner, and looking behind him, he saw the car was getting slower for a moment. He was beginning to get worried. Luckily, a few moments later, the car drove down the street and disappeared around the corner. Luke breathed a sigh of relief. He was being ridiculous. Luke got out of his car and walked up to the door. He knocked on it, hoping that Greg would be home. After waiting for a while, Luke realized that Greg must be out. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the spare key that Greg had given him a few weeks ago. Luke opened the door and then closed it behind him. Then Luke saw the man on the couch. He was a man finely dressed with a gray suit and a blue dress shirt. He wore a metallic mask with the face of a rabbit carved into the sterling silver. There were no holes in the mask, only the ominous face of the almost photorealistic silhouette of a rabbit's face. He was lounging on the couch, relaxing as if he didn't have a care in the world. It was then when Luke had seen the blood on his mask. The man pulled the blue handkerchief from his breast pocket and began to wipe away the blood. "Well, Luke, I was hoping to get a bit more of a reaction out of you than that dumb look on your face," the rabbit said matter-of-factly. He spoke with a kind of an accent that he couldn't quite nail down. It sounded almost German. Luke turned around to leave the house. He was not going to put up with this bullshit. And that's when he saw the second man in a metallic mask with a monkey's face standing behind him with a crowbar. Luke paced backwards with his hands up. He then turned to the man in the rabbit mask. "Who the hell are you? How do you know my name?" "Did George put you up to this?" Luke asked, convinced, more like hoping, that this was some kind of sick joke. Such a cliché response, don't you think, Mr. Darwin? The other man nodded slightly. "You know, I've been watching you for some time now, Luke. You're obviously confused. They all usually are, but let's just get straight to the facts, shall we? Mr. Darwin and I represent clientele of enormous wealth and status. To put it in layman's terms, it would be very easy for us to cover up your death. Don't worry though, my dear friend, because we have a proposition for you. Your first option is to come with us right now, take a short drive to our little playground, and have ourselves a little bit of fun. And your second option is to die right here and now. My colleague and associate Mr. Darwin here will bash you over the head with this crowbar repeatedly until you're dead. A skilled professional cleanup crew will arrive in exactly 20 minutes and dispose of your decomposing body before your friend even comes home. Now, personally, I would advise the latter, considering what's to come, but I'm afraid we'd like you to consider the former." Luke stood there, dumbfounded and absolutely confused. This had to be a joke, right? The utter absurdity of this scenario was getting to him. He was about to be kidnapped by men with animal masks. It was like he was in some sort of cheesy B-movie. Luke began to chuckle, thinking that this was a joke planned by George. The rabbit looked unamused. It's not like he could tell if he was amused anyways. "Alright, well, you got me for a minute there. Seriously though, what's with the masks? I would have taken you a bit more seriously if you were wearing ski masks or something." The rabbit sat down on the couch and put his hand on his chin. "You know, Luke, we've been asked that question almost every day for the past 3 years. People always laugh and dismiss us, only to realize a few moments later how horribly wrong they were. Now, I'll admit, it was cute at first, but at this point, it's just becoming fucking annoying. We will, however, indulge you, just this once. Part of the reason we wear a mask is because of this." The rabbit removed his mask, revealing his grotesque, rotting face. Beneath the mask was a shimmering white smile. One of his ears was missing, leaving only a hole where his ear hopefully once was. The rabbit's eyes were bloodshot, yet full of an almost childlike excitement. His face was covered in scars and burns, and for a moment Luke thought he saw some pus seep from one of the gaping wounds. The man pulled out a cigarette and lit it with a lighter made out of the same material as his mask. Luke saw a deep scar on the man's neck, and around that scarred neck was a rabbit's foot dangling on a thin black string. Luke staggered backwards. He didn't know what the hell was going on. "Please, why don't you just let me go? I won't tell anyone? Even if we were going to let you go? Who would believe you anyways? Time is running out, Luke. We're running on a very tight schedule here. Have you made your decision?" Luke paused for a second. What had the man meant when he said, "considering what's to come"? Before he could finish that thought, the man began counting down. 5. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't possibly be happening. Why him? Why now? Maybe this is all just some sort of sick joke. Maybe he could still make it out alive. 4. Nah, these sons of bitches can't be reasoned with. Luke accepted that this was real. He thought of trying to fight the man with the crowbar, but he knew it was going to be useless. This powerlessness was one of the most infuriating things he's experienced in his life. 3. Maybe he could give them something. Maybe he could try to give them his wallet. He still had his grandmother's wedding ring, the one she got from her fiancé, even though they never actually got married. She kept it anyways. Apparently the guy was loaded, so it might be worth something. 2. Luke knew this was futile. Maybe the right idea would be to let them kill him. He doesn't know what's waiting for him, but the seriousness in the rabbit's voice when he said he'd rather die than do what Luke was about to do chilled him to the bone. 1. No, even if he has the smallest chance to get out of this alive, he has to take it. It would be risky, but he could possibly pull through. "All right, I'll go with you," Luke shouted. "Excellent, Mr. McCarthy. Wonderful. Now all I need you to do is sign this contract given your consent. Then we'll be ready to go. Mr. Darwin, fetch the papers. We've got ourselves another contestant in the Day of the Lords." Luke sat down on the couch where the rabbit had been sitting. The man with the crowbar came back over with the papers. The rabbit reached into his breast pocket and got out a silver pen. These people really loved theatrics. The rabbit snapped his fingers. "Mr. Darwin, please give our friend here a surface to write on." The giant got onto his knees and pointed to his metallic mask. Up close, Luke could see this man had similar scars to the rabbit. Luke placed the paper on the man's mask and signed his name, even dotting the I in his last name like he always had. "Excellent. Now, Mr. Darwin, if you would please." As soon as the rabbit had said this, the man kneeling down before Luke stabbed him in the neck with the syringe. Luke grabbed the man's arm, trying desperately to break free, but he could already feel his vision fading. Before he knew it, he woke up on the tiled floor of the white room. Luke was wearing loose-fitting white clothes, almost like a robe. There was a large door in front of him. The door was decorated with an ebony doorknob and some form of pattern painted in gold. Luke opened the door. An auditorium full of people was now visible to him. Each of the audience members was wearing the same metallic mask as the rabbit and the man with the crowbar. They were all dressed in elegant but gaudy clothing. The entire audience began to clap as the spotlight was shown on Luke. The rabbit walked out. He was holding a microphone in one hand and a pocket watch in the other. He'd had a wardrobe change since they'd last met. He was now in a white suit with a dark green undershirt and a black tie. The rabbit waved to the crowd like he was a politician on a campaign trail, and Luke couldn't believe what he was seeing. Should he laugh or should he scream? The rabbit glanced at the pocket watch and pressed his hand against his mask. "Oh dear, we're running a little behind schedule, folks," he chimed, and the crowd began to laugh. "Let's make this quicker than usual, shall we? Ladies and gentlemen of the distinguished aristocracy, welcome to the 95th annual Day of the Lords. What a show we have planned for all of you tonight, and it's been my honor to host this event for around 3 years now. Now, we all know you've been waiting for this for some time now, and I won't indulge too much in theatrics. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Luke McCarthy. He is the biological grandson of a man that I'm sure you all know very well. Mr. McCarthy is a descendant of the former council member of our little club. He's a direct descendant of Theodore Kennedy. The rabbit paused as some of the audience members gasped. People in the crowd began to whisper. Luke had no idea what this man was talking about. He didn't even have grandfathers by that name. In fact, he hadn't heard that name in his life until this point. Now, I'm sure you're all confused, as I'm sure you are aware we already purged our ranks of the dreaded Kennedy line years ago. But what I tell you is the truth. The Kennedy legacy did not die in that fire. Our friend Luke here is the last remaining Kennedy on the planet Earth, whether he is aware of it or not. And according to our information, his father was conceived out of wedlock. His mother had broken off her engagement to her husband after discovering the secret of our distinguished organization. They did not part ways after that. We don't know the exact details of how this man's father was conceived, but the evidence is overwhelming that this is the last remaining Kennedy. What an exciting and excellent turn of events. Don't you all think? The crowd began to clap once again, cheering wildly, yet still having a sense of civility. Luke couldn't even comprehend what was going on. His senses had been completely overloaded. This was insane. He stood there, not able to understand what was going on. All he could do was watch. Now, Theodore Kennedy was a traitor and a disgrace to this renounced organization, and to think that moron believed he could really take out this leviathan of an organization always makes me laugh. Unfortunately, Mr. McCarthy's father passed a few years ago, long before we discovered Mr. Kennedy's secret. So, we must be satisfied with the next best thing. Instead of killing the last remaining son of the Kennedy line, we'll have to settle for this. Now, let's begin the blood sport and pain, shall we? As soon as the man finished this sentence, 2 more men appeared from behind the curtain. The crowd at once began to cheer. The 2 men put a bag over Luke's head and tied his hands and feet together. Luke was dragged for around 5 minutes until they reached their destination. They cut his restraints and pushed him into the room, then closed the door behind him. In front of him was a glass window with 2 buttons in front of it. Above the window there was a sign written in red paint. Judgment. Luke walked up to the window and placed his hand on it. The window was sturdy, maybe made out of plexiglass. He could barely make out what was on the other side. He tried to take a few steps back to get a better look. 2 spotlights turned on and revealed 2 men kneeling on the ground, stark naked and chained to the wall. They were either passed out or drugged. A projector turned on above him and the spotlights turned off. It projected the face of the rabbit on the wall. This is your first of your tests, Mr. McCarthy. The 2 men who kneel before you are what most people would consider a detriment to society. One is a homeless man by the name of Alfred Kennedy, the other a sex predator by the name of Alfred Kennedy. Both of these men share the name of your grandfather. You most likely noticed the 2 buttons in front of you. The one on the left will kill the sex offender. The one on the right will kill the homeless man. Let me give you just a little bit of their backstory. Alfred Kennedy lost his job in 1999, the job he worked at for over 20 years. Suffice it to say, he couldn't get another job after that. The problem was that he needed money for his daughter. When she was just 10 years old, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. After 2 years of desperately searching for a job, Alfred eventually realized he would not be able to save his daughter. She died later that year. The only solace he could find from his pain was rum and painkillers. Things ended up with him on the streets. That is where we found him. He's a man who's lost his reason to live, but a good man at heart. Now tell me, Luke, do you value this man's life? Alfred Kennedy has been called everything from a gentleman to a monster. He was an extinguished member of our ranks for many years until he eventually decided that he would throw his life away. He was found guilty just last month. Before his trial, we snatched him up, called in a few favors, and now he's here with us. This man has ruined the lives of up to 20 women in this county alone. Running him through would not be such a bad thing, would it? But wait, there is, however, a third option, and you probably haven't even noticed it yet. But there is a saw in the corner of the room. Both of these men will get to live on one condition. We want 2 fingers. That is, 2 of your fingers for the lives of these men. Will you be willing to sacrifice them in order to save your fellow man regardless of their crimes? Luke was simply not the kind of man to make sacrifices for such a vile person. He thought the choice was relatively simple. He was going to kill the monster. He was going to kill the one who ruined so many people's lives. But there was something about this decision that made him shiver. It made him apprehensive. He had never taken a life before. This would be a first for him. He wasn't the type to sacrifice for a monster, but he wasn't a monster himself. He stood there hoping that someone would make the decision for him. Luke didn't know if he could live with the guilt of taking another man's life. The situation was so surreal. Luke began to trace his steps, hoping that maybe he was dreaming. Maybe someone had slipped him something last night at the bar. This train of thought was interrupted by the current situation. He had to make a choice. Luke took the easy route. He pressed the button to kill the monster. The spike shot out immediately, piercing the man's chest. At least he wouldn't be awake to feel it, Luke thought. A few moments later, another spike came out from behind the other man, piercing his chest as well. Their blood began to trickle to the ground and pool around them. Luke fell to the ground, stunned by what had just occurred. Why did both of them die? It was his decision to kill one of them. Why did they kill both? This was not his decision. This was not his choice. And then the rabbit came over the speaker. I bet you're wondering why we killed both of them, aren't you, Luke? Well, we couldn't just let him loose to tell the world our secret, now could we? It's beginning to get to you. I could feel it. The utter hopelessness. How intoxicating it is to see you struggle like a fish caught on a hook. You know your struggling is for naught. Yet you continue because that's the only thing you can do. You struggle and pray for a quick death. But anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I should save the monologue for later. Well then, let's head off to the next room. A door opened up on his right. Luke did not move. He just sat there. The guilt and shame of what he had done had begun to swallow him whole. There was a civil war brewing in his consciousness. Part of him just wanted to stay here for as long as possible. He wanted to delay the inevitable. Trying to stop the death was futile, but he just wanted to sit here quietly. Luke wanted this to pass, but he knew it wouldn't. Once again, he rose to his feet and began to walk towards the door. The next room was pitch black. Nothing could be seen apart from a sign illuminated with a small spotlight. The sign once again was one word written with red paint. Sacrifice. The spotlights lit up the hallway one at a time, and once again there was a man naked and on his knees on the end of the hallway. But the long shaggy hair was familiar to him. His vision wasn't as good as it used to be, but it looked almost like George. He ran up to the man. It was George. There was a crowbar in front of him with a note attached to it. On the note it said, "A little gift, signed Mr. D." The rabbit's voice came on the speaker once again. "I'll keep this short, Mr. McCarthy. You're a smart man. Well, you're not that smart, but at least above average. I think you understand what you have to do here. Kill the man in front of you, or neither of you leave here alive." Just as quickly as the voice came, it left him. It left him with a simple ultimatum. Kill your best friend, or die. Luke stared at the crowbar once again. He was almost numb by this point. His senses had been flooded to a point where he felt like he was going to vomit. Luke wished for it all to be over. He had already killed 2 men this night. Did he really want to add another to the body count? George started to wake up. He looked up at Luke and began to speak. Luke, what in the hell are you doing, man?" he asked groggily. Luke couldn't say anything. He didn't know what the hell to say. Where the hell would he even start? Being kidnapped by men in animal masks and forced to kill for their entertainment seemed like something that could only happen in fiction. It was just a bad dream. Either that, or his sanity was starting to unravel. Either way, he hoped it would all end soon with him waking up, or him falling asleep for one last time. "Where the fuck are we, Luke? What are you doing with that crowbar?" George was confused. It was obvious to him. He had no idea where to start. His throat began to burn and swell up. He couldn't tell if he was going to cry or laugh. George noticed the restraints. The man began to tug desperately at his chains to no avail. Luke tried to help him. He tried to break the chains and set his friend free, but a piercing screech came from somewhere in the room. Luke dropped the crowbar covering his ears and fell to the floor. After the sound stopped, the rabbit came on the loudspeaker once again. "Well, you didn't think I would make it that easy for you, did you?" "No, Luke, you're not weaseling your way out of this like your grandfather. This was your decision. Now you have to be a man and stick with it. Now, Mr. McCarthy, you pick up that crowbar and you get to work." "Who the hell is that? Luke, please tell me what the fuck is happening right now. Please." He was beginning to tear up. The reality of the situation was getting to him. He thought for a moment, maybe if he could just let them both die now, nobody else would have to die tonight. What happened next, he could never explain. He didn't know if it was out of cowardice or some kind of primal animalistic survival instinct. George began to speak, but Luke had made his choice. It was impulsive, yes, but it was a choice he came to regret for the rest of his life. "Please, Luke, I just..." The crowbar smashed George's jaw first. His shattered jawbone began to hang loosely below his mouth. Gurgled moans of pain were the only thing that came out of his mouth. Luke hit him again. Part of his skull had caved in, but the bastard was still alive. He just wanted it to end. He just wanted it to stop. Luke hit him again and again until the only sound that came out of George was the sound of the blood seeping from his open wounds. Luke panted, trying to catch his breath. His breathing was shaky and his heart was racing. This was his 3rd kill tonight, but this time it was by his own hand. His heart wasn't the only thing that was racing. His thoughts were jumbled. "Well done, Mr. McCarthy, well done. Excellent job. Well, this was a surprising turn of events, wasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? He sure does have the Kennedy blood running through his veins. Wow, a true bloodied killer through and through." The rabbit began to whisper into the microphone. "If you knew even half the things that man did to me, you'd be thanking me for the things that I'm doing to you, Luke. Now why don't you move on to the next room before I change my fucking mind and kill you right now?" This man was insane. What had his grandfather done to this man to make him so angry? By the way he spoke, had made it seem like there was a long-running hatred between the two. But Luke couldn't think about that right now. He was mourning the loss of his friend. What a pathetic excuse for a man he was. He had killed his best friend without a moment of hesitation, and Luke fell to his knees and began to cry. This was the end. There was no way out for him. After a few minutes, the piercing screech came again. This was the one and only warning for him to move. He complied and walked to the next room. He held on to the crowbar, and once again the next room was dark and illuminated by one spotlight, shining like a lighthouse on a foggy night. On a sign, one word written in red paint: Finale. The rabbit's voice echoed through the large room. You know, folks, my associate and I were not the only one mutilated by Mr. McCarthy's illegitimate grandfather. No, these things that lurk in this labyrinth got it much worse than I. You should hear the screams of the cleaning crew who came to clean up the blood and remain at night. Keeping these abominations fed is a hassle, but it's worth every cent. It's very single cent to see the sheer horror on men's faces when these pitiful bastards get close enough to see them. Now then, let's get this show on the road. This is the room I lovingly call the finale. Jesus, when will it end? Hadn't he already gone through enough already? Luke took a slow step forward. There was something different about this room than all the other ones. His breath was visible now. The room was cold, colder than anything he's experienced in his life. His thin clothing didn't do much to protect him against it. His muscles began to twitch, and his knees began to quake. The icy sting was starting to nip at his face. Each step warmed him up slowly, but then the cold would rush back to him. The cold was goading him into thinking he was actually going to get away. It almost reminded him of a neighbor in his childhood. That one boy would constantly goad Luke into arguments he could never win, and he had one of the most annoying laughs you could ever hear. The distant humming of the room even reminded him of that prick's cackling. Maybe it was the cold, but he felt his mind began to wander. Luke had to focus. He started to walk again. In the distance he heard muffled screaming, like someone was trying to cover his scream with their hands over their mouth. Luke pressed his back against the wall. When he heard the thumping of his heart, he tried taking slow, deep breaths to calm himself down. Staying calm was the key to getting out of here alive. He needed to think as rationally as possible if he wanted to get out of here. Luke looked around the corner to get a better look at what was making the noise. The sight made him dry heave. A man, at least he thought it was that, was standing in the middle of the long corridor. It was wearing the same clothes as he was, thin white robes with bare feet, but the clothes were tattered and torn, and by the looks of it, the thing was missing an arm. Luke eventually noticed that the creature was dragging the missing arm behind itself. Its head was shaved and scarred by surgical incisions. The face reminded him of the rabbit's. The monster grunted like some kind of animal and looked behind itself. He saw that the creature's eyes were sewed shut, and Luke quickly went back behind the wall, and he gripped the crowbar tightly. The temperature of the room began to rise. It wasn't just hypothermia setting in. The labyrinth was getting noticeably warmer. The monster was getting closer. It dragged its decomposing arm behind itself. The grunts were more curious now. It was like it was trying to find where he was through some form of echolocation. Luke heard the familiar voice come over the radio. "There's no room for the weak, Luke. No room for the weak. Nobody out there will show you any mercy, so why do you expect us to? We're just trying to make you a better man. We're making you a more experienced man. The Lords aren't just a group of wannabe serial killers, dear friend. We're merely firm believers in natural selection. But that's been treaded on so many times before. I'll tell you what, Luke, you get past this little trial and we'll let you free. We'll even pay for your therapy when you get out. All you have to do is bash that fucking thing's head in. The thing was getting closer now. It was do or die. Luke gripped the crowbar even tighter. Before, the killing had a bit of hesitation because he was killing another human being. This thing lost whatever humanity it had a long time ago. Freedom was close. He didn't even care if it was just another trick anymore. He needed some kind of hope to cling to. Otherwise, he would fall apart. He needed something to believe in, even if it meant being in denial. Ironic, considering how worried he was about rationality just a few minutes ago. No time for that now. Luke turned the corner and raised the crowbar. Before the swing impacted, before the killing blow had landed, there was a split second where he saw her face. It was the face of the woman he'd spent months of his life with. He really was losing his vision, wasn't he? He recognized the face. It was Mary's. The crowbar shattered her fragile skull like porcelain. He'd killed 2 of his friends tonight, and 2 more innocent people as well. That wasn't the thing that scared him. It was the numbness he felt, the tingly feeling he felt in his chest. The pain was being delayed. He just knew it. He didn't even mourn this time. Luke just kept walking, dropping the crowbar behind him. He opened the next door to rousing applause. He was back in the auditorium. He was back in the room that started it all. He confronted the clapping with a look of complete confusion. Whatever had happened had completely drained him. He was a broken man. The rabbit came out and pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket. He dabbed away some of the blood on Luke's face and then turned to the crowd. "What a wonderful performance! Am I right, folks?" The crowd roared in excitement. "Well, I'd like to thank Mr. McCarthy for his stunning display for us tonight. I mean, the raw emotions that we captured here tonight will stay with me for the rest of my life. So, how does it feel, Mr. McCarthy?" Luke began to mutter to himself, still staring at the crowd. The rabbit pressed the microphone to his lips until he heard his own voice over the speaker. "What if I tell everyone?" The crowd laughed. They laughed like he was some kind of child trying to grasp how the world worked for the first time. They knew it wasn't so simple. "Do you wonder why we wear these get-ups? I mean, didn't you even wonder why we went through the effort of putting such showmanship and vigor into this night? Well, it's because no one will believe you. Telling anyone is social suicide. Hell, they'll lock you up in a padded cell and happily listen to your deranged laughter, knowing that their bank account is full of the Lord's money. Now, I must wish you good night, everyone. The wife is cooking meatloaf tonight. I'll see you next year. Have a great evening," the rabbit said. He placed something in Luke's hand and then closed it for him. Then he whispered something into his ear. "We didn't kill you for a reason. Your grandfather was a monster. But then again, we all are. Welcome to the Lords, Mr. McCarthy. We hope to see you again next year." Then the man walked out like nothing had happened. The crowd began to get out of their seats and talk amongst themselves. Luke remained on the stage for around an hour, staring at his fist. After the crowd had cleared out, a door opened behind him and sunlight began to flood the room. Luke turned around and walked out the door. On that night, Luke McCarthy died, and a Lord was born.